took 6 days to look into it. Yes, I was sent out. I did come. I came, and the Negro press did. The Negro press came to us and asked us our story. The Negro press came to us and asked us what took place. Yes, sir. Listen, ma'am, the Negro press, the Sentinel, the Eagle, the Herald Dispatch, Jet, all the Negro press, and not only them, across the country. New York, Amsterdam News, Philadelphia Tribune, all of the Negro papers asked us what happened. And what made me feel so good, and it makes me even feel more good to see Brother Roy Wilkins' telegram, that there's not a Negro in America who was gullible enough to eat the story that Chief Parker fed to the wire services. Yes, sir. I don't know. Sir? I don't think, well, I don't know if I would be wise to say what I think along that line, but I don't think it was calculated to happen right then because there was so much ignorance involved. So many ignorant moves were made by the police, it's impossible for me to believe that the police could have planned that thing. They made too many mistakes. They were very foolish in practically everything that they did. I'm inclined to believe, as one of them did say this, when they were shooting up, they shot around inside the mosque, so much so that we found bullets laying on the floor inside a religious house of prayer. If someone throws a glass through the window of a synagogue or through the window of a church, everybody's up in arms all over the world. Here is the police department shooting up a house of prayer indiscriminately. And they didn't have any doubt about where they were because the sign in there says that this is authorized as a house of worship by the Los Angeles, and it conforms with all of the Los Angeles municipal codes. They were left lying on the street for some time, and they were handcuffed. They were handcuffed and bleeding. It arrived very late. They'd arrived early. As I told you earlier, even the policeman said, why should the ambulance hurry? There's nothing but niggers out there. Why, if some of you could hear or were aware of the conversation that the police engaged in concerning this event, I don't care how much anti-Muslim you might be, your own humane quality would make you resent with shame and their disgraceful behavior.
With the investigation and the pictures you have, what do you plan to do with them other than enlighten the press?
At this particular point, it's not our intention to divulge what we intend to do. But I will say this, that no matter how much effort is put forth by the daily press to suppress the facts of the brutal murder of this black man and the cold-blooded shooting of these other 6 black men, the press in Africa won't camouflage it. The press in Asia won't camouflage it. The press in Latin America won't camouflage it. These facts will be fed to them. And it makes America look like imbecile to send billions of dollars to all of these dark countries trying to buy their friendship and their sympathy and their allegiance, and then shoot down black men in this country in cold blood and think that they can sell their form of the democracy or ideology to those people over there. I'll ask my lawyer.
How do you account for the injuries sustained by the officer? What is the one was shot?
Sir, use your common sense. I don't like to go into the intricate details, but here's one witness. One witness tells us how the cop had shot a brother point blank through his groin and through his penis. Shot him in the guts like this. So the brother grabbed the gun to keep from being shot again. He was wrestling, trying to keep that gun from pointing at him, and someone hit him in his head. And when they hit him in his head, the cop took it and blasted him right through here. It's easy for me to tell how a cop could have gotten shot. They could have shot each other. They went mad that night. They were wild that night. They were like maniacs that night.
You don't believe that one arrested a gun from an officer?
I don't think it's so much the work of the Ku Klux Klan, but they do say that there is a strong Klan-like element in Southern California. And a Klan don't have to put on a white sheet, not in 1962. Today they can put on business suits, police uniforms, lawyers' uniforms. They come all kinds of ways, but they're just as much Klansmen today as they were 30 years ago. I don't think that. Sir? Negro leaders are against police brutality no matter whom it is practiced against. Sir?
What would your penalty be if one of your members of your lodge went astray of your rules? What would your penalty be?
He couldn't stay with us. If any
ever happened?
Yes. Any Muslim who can't abide by the laws of Islam cannot walk with us.
Conceivable then that one could have had a weapon.
No. One didn't have a weapon. And you can get a microscope, sir. I know that a weapon must be found to in some way justify the atrocity that was committed. They must find a weapon. They can't find a weapon. It's like not with a Muslim. A Muslim isn't even allowed to have a weapon in his home, much less upon his person. Well, if you are twisting someone's arm, you're the one that attacked. I said, well, as I said, our religion teaches us to always obey the law religiously. I'm going to tell you, our religion teaches us to always obey the law, above all, first and above all. But at the same time, anyone who attacks us, we are allowed to defend ourselves. To my knowledge, the policeman, in his questioning of the brother, refused to accept the brother's answer. He wanted the brother to be a burglar. He wanted him to be a burglar. And because he had no evidence that the man was a burglar, he wanted the brother to be impolite. But because the brother was polite to the extreme, it infuriated him. And he grabbed him and began to twist his arm. And, sir? No, they weren't. No. I think that these intricate details will be brought out in the investigation. No. There were two brothers and two officers. This Negro special cop that I was telling you about, he drove by and fired shots, and naturally everybody came out, and a lot of people around there a lot of the people that you thought were Muslims probably weren't even Muslims. When you get excited, everybody looks like a Muslim to you. No, a Muslim doesn't carry a gun. So when he started shooting, the alarm went out, as I said, and as the papers give it, 75 came, but they didn't come to where the incident took place. They came to the temple. He was at the temple. Yeah, he didn't even know what had happened down the street. All he heard was gunshots. No, sir. When he heard gunshots, he asked his wife, who had his little baby, to please go in the back someplace. There's trouble outside. And he went up and made a telephone call. And when he came downstairs, then this is when the general alarm cops had arrived. And they arrived, as I said, with their guns blazing. Yes, very important, yes. If the police in America have a special riot tactic, which you're probably familiar with. Whenever there's trouble, they pull up to the scene and firing up in the air. That's one of the tactics. This is supposed to put fright into the persons who are involved and make them be quelled. Well, this is what these police did. But when they pulled up with their guns blazing, instead of those guns blazing in the air, those guns were blazing at Negroes. And what Parker is trying to do now is make the Negroes in the community think that we're not Negroes, that we're something different, and that all of them should be against us. And once he gets us out of the way, what they don't realize is they'll start on him.
Why do you want to do that, Malcolm?
Sir?
Why do you think these guys will have to do that?
Well, any type of unity that's displayed by Negroes today automatically is a threat to the power structure or the status quo. And today, for the first time, Negroes are beginning to show more unity in America than they've ever showed in the history that we've been here. Our differences are set in the background. And this is dangerous. This is considered dangerous by some elements. Everybody else can be in together. Ambulances were rushing to the mosque. So one officer said, what they rushing for? Just a nigger, just another nigger shot. And when he got to the precinct, he turned to the brother and says, I hope you don't mind don't take offense at what I said back there under the heat of emotion, because some of my best friends are colored.
You maintain, then, that...
This brother here, whose head was beaten, they told him, one officer said to the other, I broke my nightstick over the nigger's head. So the other officer said to him, well, you should have had one of the new kind, and it wouldn't have broken. When the brother who was shot through the, up above the heart and through the penis was laying on the floor, was laying in the station, the officer was telling him, nigger, get up and run so I can kill you. These things happen. Well, I think, sir, that when you read reports of the type of information that Parker has been feeding to the press, and the press has been feeding to the public, and in turn also to the police officers, it has created, as the California Eagle, you can get the answer in the California Eagle this week. Beautifully, they described how Parker has been filling his own men with fear and hatred of the black community, and especially of the Muslims. Well, the man, see, when you give a man as much power as Los Angeles has given him, and you don't have anyone around here who seems nerve enough to challenge him, naturally he does the same thing that Hitler did in Germany. He begins to think that he is God, and any act that he commits is a godly act, no matter how atrocious it is. I doubt that any other police chief in any other city would dare to come along behind his men, behind the type of crime that his men committed in this Negro community, and try and sell it to the white public.
What about the men, the other Negroes who entered into the argument when the police were making the arrest of the original two? Do you condone their actions in getting into the fight?
In order to clarify that, you'd have to have a knowledge of what was taking place down there. And I was born in America, in Omaha, Nebraska. Malcolm.
Why do you use that?
Well, easy I can explain it. Well, just a moment. When you ask me about my name,
I only wanted to tell the public who you are.
if a Chinese were to come in here and say his name was Patrick Murphy, you'd know that somewhere along the line he got in trouble or fell by the wayside. So that's not a Chinese name. No. If a Chinese person has no business with an Irishman's name, if a yellow man looks absurd wearing a white man's name, it's even more absurd for a black man to have a white man's name. The Negroes, and you ask for an explanation, you can take my explanation. If you want it, take it the way I give it to you, or you don't want it. The Negroes in this country who have English names, those names represent the last slave master who owned their grandparents. It is not their name. It is the slave master's name. So when we become Muslims, sir, and we turn back toward our own culture, we cut aside completely those things that stigmatized us in this country. That also represents the unknown, and I think you will agree that the history of the black man, before he was brought to this country, you'll find that he came from Africa, which had a Muslim culture and Muslim civilization, a great part of it. And the Mali Empire stretched from the Nile River over to the shores of West Africa. That was a Muslim empire. The Moorish Empire was Muslim. The empires that existed in northern Nigeria were Muslim. Kano, one of the oldest cities in Africa, was a Muslim city 500 years before Columbus discovered America. So now when you ask me how, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, who is teaching the black people in this country that the only way that we can solve the race problem is not by forcing ourselves upon the white man, but by doing something for ourselves, teaches us also that we'll never have the incentive or the desire to do anything for ourselves until we first learn something about ourselves, about our past. The NAACP is against any type of brutality, and which we are too. The NAACP is for integration. We're for separation, and we agree on the objective, but we disagree on the method. Actually, what both of us want is human dignity for the black people in this country. And the NAACP thinks that integration is the road that will bring about a solution to the problem that the black man is confronted with. I'm Minister Malcolm X of Muhammad's Mosque number 7 in New York City, and the national representative of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, who is our spiritual leader and teacher. And Friday night, April the 27th, at approximately 11:15 o'clock, in what has since come to be seen as a tragic comedy of errors, police errors, 7 innocent, unarmed black men were shot down in cold blood by Police Chief William H. Parker's Los Angeles City Police. One of these 7 innocent, unarmed black men is now dead. He was murdered in cold blood by police bullets. Another is paralyzed. 5 others are hospitalized from bullet wounds and are also in serious condition. These were 7 innocent men, 7 innocent black victims of police bullets. This did not happen in Hitler's Nazi Germany. This happened to innocent black men in Los Angeles, California. How could this brutal crime against innocent, unarmed human beings occur in America with no public outcry by the well-thinking Americans? It is because Police Chief William H. Parker has misused the American press, the radio, television, newspapers, and the wire services to spread false propaganda in order to camouflage the true facts in one of the most savage, ferocious, inhuman, and atrocities ever inflicted upon unarmed, innocent human beings in a so-called democratic and civilized society. This Gestapo-type atrocity and the effort to cover up the atrocity with the sanction and the support of the American press is in itself a crime against any society that professes to be civilized, religious, and God-fearing, and makes America look like a savage, uncivilized police state in the eyes of our brothers and sisters in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. And simply because Chief William H. Parker's well-armed stormtroopers wore police uniforms while shooting down these 7 innocent black men in cold blood doesn't make the criminal actions of the policemen any more right than the uniforms worn by Hitler and his uniformed Gestapo police who shot down the innocent Jews in Nazi Germany. Despite Police Chief William H. Parker's efforts to justify this brutal act of cold-blooded murder by his police department and the seeming willingness of the white press to help him suppress the facts, the truth must leak out. And the good-thinking Americans who learn the truth about this case and fail to protest vigorously this type of police state murder should never again speak out against Hitler, Nazi Germany, and the Gestapo police brutalities practiced against the innocent Jews in Nazi Germany. Of the National Association of the Advancement of Colored People, written to Edward Warren, president of the local NAACP, what he says, and I quote, the national office supports fully the protest which the Los Angeles branch has lodged in the brutal police killing of Ronald Stokes. Police brutality against any segment of the population demands vigorous action by all elements in the city. There is an incredible report circulating here that some sections of the Los Angeles Negro community are remaining silent because Stokes was a leader in the Muslim movement. We urge our Los Angeles branch to press in all possible ways to bring the guilty police to account and to rally the other groups to do likewise. Never in its history has the NAACP withheld condemnation of and action against police brutality because of race or religion, and it will not do so now. That's a statement made from our good friend, Roy Wilkins.
Have colored people ever attacked the Ku Klux Klan or the White Citizens Council or any group of that sort?
Have what?
Have the colored policemen ever went in and shot up Ku Klux Klan or
There's no record of so-called Negro policemen
the Nazis?
ever making an attack on the Ku Klux Klan, the White Citizens Council, or any group. The policemen who police's dance halls came by and fired some shots, and these shots caused an alarm to be sent out over the police network. And instead of the police coming to the scene of the crime, scene of the so-called incident, which was a block away from our religious place of worship, they came straight to the mosque. And when they drove up there shooting with their, as the local press has already pointed out, with their guns blazing. The local press called it a blazing gun battle. Muslims don't carry guns. And what you described as a blazing gun battle was the blazing guns of policemen against unarmed black men. Down in cold blood by the officer. He was unarmed. And 6 other men were shot down in the same manner. They were unarmed. And every police department in America, including the FBI, no matter what criticisms they have of the Muslims who follow Mr. Muhammad, they admit that we do not carry arms. We aren't even allowed to carry as much as a penknife or a fingernail file. But it was... So after these men were, when the police finally subdued them, and as they shot them down, they handcuffed them. When Ronald was shot, the police weren't satisfied. They beat him. While he was laying on the ground with a bullet through his heart, they put a hole in his head with their club. Right there, how close they were when they let him, how close they were up on him when they let him have it. And after he had, and the autopsy that was performed without in the knowledge of his family, of his relatives. They just cut him open to get the bullet because he's just another Negro. And after he was shot down, it shows how they knocked a hole in his head with their club, and then had the audacity to maneuver the white press into saying that some policemen were injured, but they never pointed out the injuries that they had inflicted. One other Negro was shot through the chest, shot a quarter of an inch above his heart. The bullet passed through his hole in Ronald Stokes' head. This is the man that was murdered. Now, why would he have to have his head knocked in besides a bullet through his heart? These pictures were taken. These weren't taken by me, but they were taken. And it,
I ask you, did you see any of this? Or are you giving us the result of your study?
I'm giving you the result of my investigation.
You were not there. Welcome. Here's a preliminary. I just said the preliminary, because I'm going to ask you, have you been called to testify before the grand jury?
No. No. First, let me answer this. This man here who was shot through the heart, or rather shot a quarter of an inch above the heart, and it came out through his back. He was also shot in the penis. It went through his stomach. He spent 48 hours in police custody without hospitalization. When finally he made bail 48 hours later, along with 2 other brothers who had been shot, we picked them up at police headquarters standing in the corridor where they had not received any medical attention. A criminal who has just robbed the bank and murdered someone isn't treated like that.
Malcolm X, may I ask this question? What about the report that we as the press have received from the police that after this altercation began at the corner of 57th and South Broadway, where the 2 suspects were being questioned, and the fight did begin, a group of Muslims from the mosque came out and said, we must help our brothers, and there is when the fight really began. Now, Our reports are to the effect that these men weren't necessarily unarmed. There was a 5-gallon jug. I saw the jug myself, by the way, upon reportedly which the head of the policeman had been struck by one of the Muslims. And there was also a report that one of the
Muslim procedure knows, and this is why it's so hard to sell this story to the Negro public. They have visited our meetings. While you can't even enter the door with a fingernail file, we are more anti-weapon than any group in the country. And the police. Do you mean to tell me that a man walked out of our mosque with a shotgun or a rifle, as the press said, and the police don't?
You ready?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. So, welcome to another episode of Subversive History. That's not it. That's not it. Should have done this earlier. There we go. There we go.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Hope everybody had a wonderful Valentine's Day, you know. Even if you spent it, you know, loving yourself and being with yourself, that's a beautiful way to spend it. Don't let anybody tell you different. Thought that video was rather interesting just because I watched Black Klansman with the wife last night. And it's kind of interesting how they're really in all the history of, policing, right? That there's never been what was that Scorpion unit or something. There's never been a Scorpion unit that has attacked a Klan meeting or anything. Thought that was pretty interesting.
Yeah. Yeah.
How you
Definitely.
feeling?
I'm feeling good. I feel somewhat energized. I feel like I got a good preparation in today for this. I feel like the chapter was a little bit tough my first read through, but then once I got some extra stuff on it, I feel pretty good about it.
Well, that's what our Twitch stream is all about. It's for tough chapters, so that way, chat if you're reading along, hopefully this makes the chapter just a little bit easier to digest. Why would the cops attack their own?
That's the point. Yeah. Also,
I mean,
wanted to make
like an all black unit of cops, right? Attacking a Klan meeting is what I mean specifically.
Yeah, or not even a Klan meeting. Let's not even be that, because I don't know how many actual Klan meetings go on these days. I think that it might be a little bit less pronounced. But even like someone who has ties to a white supremacist organization, someone has ties to alt-right organizations, those people never seem to wind up in ditches.
No.
The same way that union organizers, other types of activists, or just people of a specific race tend to die at the hands of the police.
Or, suspiciously wind up, committing suicide by 2 bullets to the back of the head in their car after organizing very successful Black Lives Matter protests. But let's get into the meat of this. Subversive History is a multimedia community project seeking to bring attention to the revolutionary struggles of the world's often unsung and frequently misunderstood sectors. These are the stories of the demonized, vilified, whitewashed, or otherwise forgotten campaigns against imperialism, colonialism, capitalist exploitation, and racial apartheid. The orthodoxy of Western hegemony has often labeled these dissidents as subversive, and these are the struggles we aim to illuminate.
Yeah. Quick little announcement also. As of January 1st, we had, I think, around 100 followers, and we made a, just a little goal to try to get to 200 by Valentine's Day. And today it is, today, day after, as of Valentine's Day, we had 303. So we more than doubled our expectation there. So very happy about that. Thank you so much for the support. Yeah. Just wanted to throw that out.
trying to figure out what the hell was the name of that channel I had playing that one time that was like free jazz or whatever.
Oh, I'm not sure. You're the jazz man here.
I am a little bit of the jazz man here. I just thought that oh, here we go. Yeah, because I feel like we kind of, we're missing a little bit of that, just
Moving background music.
yeah, just a little bit of something, filling a little
Smooth
bit.
background music to lubricate the harsh truths of history that we're going to be talking about.
The harsh truths.
That was very difficult for me to say. I don't know if you stumbled through that. The harsh truths of history.
Harsh truths.
Lubricated with some smooth jazz to lubricate them on into your ears and
And you
into
know
your
what
hearts.
You know what I can do? Yeah, I should just do it like this.
Lube it up. Oh, Ross Publica, thank you so much for the sub. Don't harsh my truths, dudes. I want my... Bruh, he's harshing my truth.
He's harshing my truth, bruh.
Thank you, Ross.
Fucking, where the hell is that thing? Oh, here we go. Yeah, this is it. This was like, the classic. There we go. We'll just leave that there. Hopefully it plays.
Hear it.
It's not playing. Maybe it'll kick in at some point. I don't know. There it is. Okay. Thank you for subscribing at tier 1. You've been subscribed for 2 months, Ross. We're indebted to, your continued support. There we go. Alright, yeah, that works. That works so good. Alright. So, The Sword and the Shield, Chapter 4, A World on Fire. Do you wanna start or should I?
Well, I'll start it off.
Alright.
So in 1960, let me see if there's anything that we have to recap over the last chapters. So we went through kind of an overall thesis of the book. We went through the origins and the overall kind of political upbringing of both Malcolm and Martin. And then last chapter, it was called The World Stage. So it kind of talks about both of these figures coming up from their origin to being on the world stage, and we're kind of picking up from the period immediately after the Montgomery bus boycotts, which Rosa Parks, SNCC has just been developed, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. Obviously Martin Luther King's SCLC has already been organized.
Right.
So that's where we are in the overall civil rights and the lives of Malcolm X and Martin Luther King. So now we're going to pick up from there. So we transition from the world stage to a world on fire. So just to give everybody a nice little context for that, if you weren't here in the previous chapters. So in 1960, Martin Luther King was arrested at an Atlanta sit-in alongside a young SNCC activist, Julian Bond. The sit-in had come on the heels of an ultimatum from student leader Lonnie King. The activist had admonished Martin Luther King, perhaps the movement's most symbolic leader, for making grand speeches without ever putting his own body in harm's way. King's reluctance to do so would become a running theme over the next several years. For the SNCC contingent at Howard University, his distance from the gritty realities of everyday struggles, the arrests, physical violence, and small and large humiliations made him a suspect leader. In contrast, John Lewis of SNCC, a native of Alabama who became part of a group of national activists dedicated to nonviolent protests, typified the students who admired King. Lewis, the future chairman of SNCC, revered King to the point of unconscious imitation, and he adopted nonviolence as a personal philosophy. A smaller faction, including Stokely and Carmichael, navigated a middle ground that identified King's uncanny rapport with ordinary black folk as an opportunity for local organizers to shape the movement as they saw fit. King's projection of affable humility and quiet courage attracted the widest spectrum of black humility. People of all types came to see him, shake his hand, and hear his rich oratory. So what we see here is that Martin Luther King is getting a little bit of criticism from the other civil rights activists as he's kind of, getting up, he's speaking, he's becoming very popular. But to some of these other organizers saying, hey, man, you ain't out here. You know what I mean? You're not out here. We're getting arrested, we're getting run down on, we're getting all these things are happening. You're up there. I know you got your rich dad and you're up on your pulpit and you say very nice things, but, you're not in the mud with us down here. So this is becoming a larger criticism of King at this point. Now, this is obviously to change. We haven't gotten to Birmingham yet. That's next chapter, so stay in store for that. But at this point in King's life, he's being criticized for not really putting his money where his mouth is, not really laying it on the line and putting himself up for being arrested or being harmed in the ways that other people are.
Right, because I mean, like it's not even just, I don't know, maybe that video was a little illustrative of like the kind of violence that, like, people faced in everyday life. And we're not even I think that was happening in which city? That was he said what, LAPD or something?
That's coming later in the chapter. We're going to talk about that. But yes, there was a murder. Several people were shot in the Nation of Islam. What's it called? Like a lodge or something like that. Temple in Los Angeles.
Right.
Yes.
I mean, like the point is, like, that's in like fairly urban, like, LA, as opposed to like the deep south in Alabama, where it's just like, the most like grisly, like, horrific things.
Something that a lot of people are forgetting is that, there is like chapters of the civil rights movement that are not necessarily taught in schools the same way that the freedom rides and the lunch counter sit-ins and the Montgomery bus boycott are. There are in Mississippi extremely militant armed resistances to the Jim Crow South. These are not talked about as much. These people were very critical of Martin Luther King. So yeah, not just, what's going on at the lodges or the temples in LA or anything like that, but, there was, issues within backwoods Mississippi where people were like arming and almost like waging a protracted people's war against the government there. So,
Which
it's a cool book. If anybody's interested, We Will Shoot Back. It's about armed resistance in the Mississippi freedom movement.
Who wrote it?
Akinele Omawale Umoja.
All right, give me a second. I'll find it online. Just give me a second. I'm just gonna Google it.
Yeah.
Really? But yeah, we debated actually going over that.
I read this. We considered this might have been, we'll go over this one soon. I promise.
Add it to the list. Come on, man. Yeah, I'm like trying to copy it and it keeps acting up.
While you're doing that, move to the next slide. I think there's a video, so you can pull this up so there's not dead air while there's.
Sick. All right. Let me just stop that. Do that.
So this is about when he was arrested in Atlanta, because if you saw, this started out with him being arrested in Atlanta, so that's important.
This is an ad. There we go. Okay.
It's time for Today in History. For this segment, we look back at the past to try and find lessons for now and in the future. Today is October 19th, and it was on this day in 1960 that Dr. Martin Luther King was arrested in Atlanta after refusing to leave his seat at a department store's segregated lunch counters. Now, I still don't really quite understand department stores even having lunch counters. Like, hey, where you getting your lunch? Sears. We all know that Dr. King was a proponent of civil disobedience, and at this sit-in protest, the civilest of disobedience is another example. The protest was one in a string of lunch counter sit-ins initiated by college students all over the South, following the more famous Woolworth sit-in in Greensboro, North Carolina. In fact, it was college students who invited Dr. King to join the 280 student-strong protest that day. 50 of them were arrested with him under a 1960 law that made refusing to leave private property a misdemeanor offense. Charges against 16 of the protesters were dismissed at their first court appearance, but Dr. King was sentenced to 6 months of hard labor for violating a probation on charges he picked up earlier that year. However, presidential candidate John F. Kennedy lent him a hand to get out of sentencing after Dr. King's family contacted him.
Hi, I'm Nicole Hockley from Sandy Hook Promise. I know this is...
Oh, was that the end of the video?
So, that was like a nice little Yeah. Just real short. That's why I picked this. Kind of a little bit of a corny video, but this isn't
It's
a very
time for
discussed
Today
topic.
in History. For this
It's nice to have
segment, we
a
look
little
back.
2-minute snip, because not only does that give us a little bit of information about their arrest itself, but also it kind of brings us up to speed about where we were following these the lunch counter sit-ins that were inspired by the Woolworths in Greensboro, North Carolina, and then that kind of reverberated, and then Dr. King was called into it, and he was arrested for this. Now, this kind of goes back to the criticisms of King, because he gets arrested with everybody else, but he has the ear of JFK, who pretty much takes like what his sentence would have been, which was 6 months in jail, and just he skirts out of it. You know what I mean? Because he's curried a nice favor with JFK. So now these next couple slides, we're gonna talk about the relationship with Martin Luther King and JFK, because that's going to be really important to the coming freedom rides, which is another interesting chapter in the civil rights. So this one's all you.
In 1960, King became friendly with John F. Kennedy, the young senator who eagerly courted his endorsement during a clandestine meeting arranged by Harry Belafonte, who was also in the Black Klansman, and Kennedy aide Harris Wofford at the beginning of the summer. King's moral passion for civil rights made the cerebral Kennedy uncomfortable. The candidate was initially cautious on racial justice matters, careful not to alienate the Southern votes he would need in a general election. An attitude of reticence that disappointed King. The two men came away from their initial meeting regarding each other as more necessary professional allies than kindred spirits. Closer personally to Nixon, whom he had met at the White House and in Ghana. King refused to publicly endorse either candidate. But after King was arrested for the sit-in in Atlanta, Kennedy had worked to secure his freedom, and he released a statement of being deeply indebted to Senator Kennedy, who served as a great force in making my release possible. Daddy King followed these words with deeds, rallying those within his sphere of influence to support Kennedy with votes. King's unintentionally pivotal role in electing Kennedy president helped him regain his political footing. Swear to God, I feel like I'm losing my mind sometimes when I'm reading this.
I set this up specifically so you would be the one to read Daddy King.
Daddy King.
Once again, yeah. Daddy King. So what we have here, we see that JFK is meeting with Martin Luther King, clandestine meetings. You know what I mean? He won't even meet him publicly. That's how controversial this is at this time. He's having secret meetings set up, and they're kind of like making little backroom deals, like, hey, we'll push your candidacy if you help us out with some of this civil disobedience we're engaging in. And my very rich, and well, I don't know how very rich he was, but relatively rich and well-connected father, Daddy King, will also use his connections throughout the churches to incentivize black people to vote for you, which turned out to be decisive in the upcoming election versus Nixon.
I mean, is there a way to Google what his net worth was?
Oh, dude, I don't know.
We
know that he was relatively rich for the black elite in Alabama. In Georgia. So it's it's kind of irrelevant.
He earned just $8,000 a year as a preacher. Oh no, that's junior, and that's the equivalent of about $58,000 in 2018 dollars. Wow, that is
still probably quite well for the black community in the South at that point.
By comparison, yeah, probably a little bit more wealthy.
Wait, go back. Did you just skip one?
Did I? I don't think I did. Oh.
Yeah. This one's me now.
Okay.
So the Kennedy campaign strategically benefited from King's Atlanta arrest and subsequent release in October of 1960. Just weeks before the election, the campaign bombarded Black Atlanta with a last-minute pamphlet contrasting the vice president, who remained silent about King's arrest, who's Nixon, with the young Massachusetts senator, no comment Nixon, versus a candidate with heart, Senator Kennedy. I feel like that sentence was typed really fucking weird.
Right?
But so no comment is a nickname for Nixon, is what they're saying. So it's like, right. here's this comparison. You either have the person that had no comment versus this slick guy from Massachusetts who loves Martin Luther King. You know what I mean? And they pamphleted this. Yeah, sitting around. For some reason, when you say that, I just picture him in Futurama. Like I just picture him in like
No comment.
the pamphlet, and more importantly, the actions that inspired it, helped Kennedy win upward of 70% of black votes nationally. Something that King would spend the next year repeatedly reminding the new president. Kennedy's election thrust King for the first time into the position that he would occupy for the rest of his life, the presidential alter ego on race matters and the conscience of the nation with respect to social justice, civil rights, and the conviction that the struggle for black citizenship represented the beating heart of American democracy. So this all goes forth. King gets helped out. They go on a pamphleting campaign that's extremely effective, gaining 70% of the black vote, not just in that area, not just in the Atlanta area, in the whole country, 70% of the vote. So now King has some like bargaining power. See, now we see
Yeah.
like the strategy of King as opposed to the strategy of Malcolm. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
King is playing into this political game. He's currying favor with politicians. And now he has the ear of the president of the United States, who he can say, I helped you get 70% of the black vote. Now I'm going to need you to help me with this, this, and that. So we can see this developing, this relationship developing.
Right. And Ross Publica brings up an excellent point. Like, he says, I think we can all agree that Bush Sr. was there for JFK, if you know what I mean. But what did he know about King? So, like, was Bush Sr. In the CIA, like, at the time of King's assassination? We come back at us with an answer to that, Ross, and I'll weigh in. I'll go a little crank, on this. So, throughout 1961, King discovered the limits of being bound to the rules that Malcolm frequently ignored. The post-election Kennedy transition to the White House proved especially challenging. An exhausted King debated James J. Kilpatrick, the segregationist editor of the Richmond News Leader, on the NBC show The Nation's Future on Saturday, November 26. The 30-minute debate left King feeling despondent for having failed to take Kilpatrick to school on the moral rightness of civil disobedience. Kilpatrick's assertions that sit-ins sparked, quote, a great deal of tense pushing and shoving in an atmosphere that is electric with restrained violence and hostility, placed King on the defensive. King's efforts to explain the great distinction between the immoral, hateful, violent resistance of many white segregationists followed the rules of civilized public engagement about race in America, but his equanimity displeased student militants.
So like the one president who was killed was held by MLK. He's not the only president that was killed, but another important one freed the slaves.
Yeah.
So you have the person who effectively freed the slaves and the person who had, I guess, the most intimate relationship with Martin Luther King. Both were shot.
Well, there's another one you're missing, and that's Garfield, and he's an interesting case if you look into like what he planned to do as far as regulating monopolies and things of that nature. And
they leave him out. You know what I mean? Yeah. He doesn't get a lot of shot.
And McKinley,
old Garfield.
Yeah, no pattern, no pattern here, no pattern whatsoever. It's like people want to act as if like JFK was like the first one. I think that was the first of like a new era because the CIA was pretty new by the time that Kennedy got his fat Irish head, blasted across the backside of a fucking motorcade.
But also, this happened at a goddamn parade. Like it's kind of weird. Like I can't imagine what it was like to like be in like the 1800s and Lincoln gets popped in some like playroom somewhere, and you have to read about it, in some paper that comes out to your little town a week later or something like that. Yeah. Whereas like Kennedy is like on the world stage, like, just getting his head blown off. Like that was just so, it's one of those things where it's like a 9/11 type day where it's like, where were you when Kennedy was killed?
Technically, that's the Zapruder film. That didn't come out till like, what, almost a decade later, right?
Oh, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, no, that Zapruder film was taken and like, wasn't seen by like anyone other than like, the person who shot the footage. I think his name is Zapruder, I forget. I don't think that was seen until like 10 years after the fact, and then it was like made kind of public, but it was like a heavily edited version. But in terms of that, I think that like Garfield is probably like the worst because First, he gets shot in the gut, and then over the course of like I think it's either a couple weeks or a month or two, he has like random people just digging around inside his guts trying to get like the bullet fragments out. They didn't know anything about like bacterial infections and stuff yet, so he died of like serious compromising infections more so than like the bullet itself.
That's like George Washington. They were like, he has bad blood. You have to get the bad blood out of him. He's very sick, and you need to start removing the bad blood. And like this was like medicine at the time
Or like the
in the 1700s, and they're just like, nope, chew on bad blood. Got to get it out. Cut him. Get the bloodletting knives and just let it out.
before we get too into
Also, it could have been Reagan. You know what I mean? We were so close to having Reagan on the list of murdered presidents.
if only. But not to get too into the weeds here, but you know what Rasputin, like why he got so close to the royal family, right?
Money, power.
I mean, yeah,
and
sure. There's all how.
having
I'm sorry.
sex with all the women.
Let me rephrase that. His route to getting into the royal family, right? And this is after listening to what last podcast on the left did, like a whole like 3-part series on it. But apparently he was like a good like horse leecher, which means that he like you like massage the muscles of the horse. So he would do that for their kid, their inbred spawn that like had debilitating hemophilia or whatever. So he's like massaging like the
From all the incest.
from all the incest.
What's up, Hash Kush? Very happy to have you. I think we all wish Hinckley had spent more time practicing his aim rather than the guitar.
I think we all wish Hinckley had spent more time.
So just a real quick, before we pass through the slide,
Okay.
we see here, so, we're looking at the difference again, kind of like what I said during your last slide, that we're looking at the very different way that Malcolm and Martin, the limits of being bound to rules that Malcolm X frequently ignored. So now he's getting more onto the world stage, and he's debating James Kilpatrick. I looked for clips of this debate. I couldn't find anything online, any video of it. It says it was televised. I can't find it.
Yeah, I don't think anybody, especially after he was assassinated, cared about like maintaining that kind of footage. Just like a half hour of like MLK losing a debate against a white racist.
But apparently from this, he did not do. So this guy, James Kilpatrick, I looked him up. This is a guy who was like from the offset, was like Brown versus the Boards of Education is unconstitutional. Like he was an out and out segregationist who actually spent like years in conservative media, like decades after this as well. Like somebody who was just like an outspoken proponent to school integration. And maybe he was pretty slick during those times because apparently he frustrated Martin Luther King, and he was pretty bummed out on that. So let's go forward. Just wanted to set the mood there a little bit.
Yeah, that, and I think we're starting to see that like they really aren't that different even now. Right, like King is actively doing the kind of things that Malcolm wants to do, but Malcolm can't help but like run his fucking mouth. Right. Meanwhile, like MLK has to like do this tightrope act, of like pleasing both sides.
Right. And also, so this beginning part, I apologize. It's light on the video, the media content. There's going to be a handful of slides of reading, but once we get to the freedom rides and a couple other things, we're going to get a good amount of video content. So I apologize to keep lurching on with this textbook.
Yeah, shame on us for being a fucking what?
Book setting.
Oh shit! Did I skip? I'm skipping forward here.
You're just going crazy right now.
Just going crazy. It's my wheel on my mouse. It has a mind of its own.
That thing's a loose cannon. During the course of the 1960s, go back one.
Sorry.
Okay, we're good. During the course of the 1960 presidential campaign, JFK had openly supported the civil rights movement, going as far as speaking approvingly of sit-in demonstrations at a lunch with African diplomats. The candidate spoke to thousands of black activists the day before the Democratic National Convention in LA and promised no second-class citizenship for any American. During a Harlem appearance less than a month before the election, he vowed to eliminate racial segregation in federal housing with the stroke of a pen.
Yeah, they all say that.
Campaign promise that thrilled black supporters. But once he reached the White House, Kennedy's famous energy stalled on racial justice issues. His delay in proposing strong civil rights legislation especially disappointed King, who dreamed of finding with the young president the political chemistry that he lacked with Eisenhower. King approached Kennedy as a fellow statesman. Kennedy intermittently recognized this fact but preferred avoiding confronting racial injustice until a crisis engulfed his administration, leaving him no other recourse but to forge an alliance with King. Kennedy's creation of a presidential committee on equal employment opportunity and efforts to add the Justice Department to a list of plaintiffs calling for school desegregation in Prince Edward County, Virginia, proved to be more token gestures of goodwill than comprehensive policy reform. So we see here, JFK was talking big game on the campaign trail. He was willing to say, oh, the stroke of a pen, I'll end that, I'll end this. And then once he gets in the White House, he's not really living up to the racial justice game that he was talking that got him the black vote and the support of Martin Luther King.
Right. So like every other progressive president,
exactly.
Makes like a ton of promises that he's going to do day one. I'm going to sign this into law. I'm going to like do this or that. And it's like, the day they're into office, it's like, actually.
Yeah. And he had the hubris and the arrogance to go into Harlem and be like, the stroke of a pen, I'll do this. We'll have no second-class citizenship. So now everybody rallies behind him. So now this is the type of thing that Malcolm X is going to bring up later and be like, see, you fucking, you want to cozy up with these, these guys, and they're going to sell you this and sell you that. And then look what happened, So get ready for Malcolm to be right on the throat of this situation.
Man, if only Malcolm could have survived to watch Barack Obama just, fall like on his fucking teeth.
Dude, he would have eviscerated Barack Obama.
Every single fucking promise with a fucking, what is it, super majority and everything. Also, yeah. Ross, again, with like your comments, bringing up like the really good shit, right? Meanwhile, Reagan said that Africans at the UN were like ill-fitting shoes. It's also what?
I gotta look that up. Ill-fitting shoes. That's
he said all kinds of fucked up, crazy shit. But it's interesting that like Nixon was buddy buddies with MLK, considering like isn't he the one that literally started like the war on drugs, literally as an excuse to like crack down on like
calls Africans monkeys who feel uncomfortable wearing shoes in newly uncovered audio.
Biden can give everyone impacted by the train crash in Ohio Medicare immediately. Technically, he could do it for COVID too. I mean, technically, they can do a lot of things. I mean, like, anytime like any president has used like the National Guard, they don't really technically have, what the fuck is it, like the right to do that, or even like, the Supreme Court have the right to enforce anything. Like, they're just opinion pieces really set up by the state. Nobody actually has to do anything that the Supreme Court fucking says. It's just like, a matter of who favors enforcing it and who gains by enforcing these opinion pieces by them. By opening up Medicare to everyone, right? Yeah. Just do like fucking single payer, Fuck. Yeah, it doesn't even require a policy change. No, not really. I mean, like,
Oh, because he actually quoted like the statute that would justify it as well.
Right. And like this is probably like the worst environmental disaster in American history. I mean, like worse than 3 Mile Island, worse than like, any of the other atomic testing shit that like, poisoned an entire town for like ever. This is really bad. I don't know if you've been looking at anything online about it, Pat.
No, I haven't. I'm sorry.
Maybe we can like go over a little bit of it like on Friday, but
I think that would be a good idea.
It's
I know you
really
moved
bad.
up. I know you moved up a slide here. Was that a single slide or?
I think it was during the 1960s.
No,
Yeah,
you're
it's
good.
a single slide.
So now just to bring it back so we don't get too far out, just know that Kennedy talked a big game on racial justice and then got in the White House, and he's not really living up to it. And a lot of people are disappointed because they supported him against Nixon, and he's kind of backpedaling a lot of the big talk that he had. So go ahead, John.
You got it. Also, David using the new emote, the new Parenti emote that we got. Hell yeah. Look at that smiling man with his little hat. So in February the 4th, in the February 4th, 1961 issue of The Nation, King threw down the gauntlet. In his essay, Equality Now, the President Has the Power, King pressed Kennedy to publicly support the struggle for black citizenship in a word and deed. The new administration has the opportunity to be the first one in 100 years of American history to adopt a radically new approach to the question of civil rights. wrote King. He urged Kennedy to embark on a bold plan of promoting racial justice through the executive orders and to use the White House as a bully pulpit. Such actions were necessary since the federal government is the nation's highest investor in segregation. King demanded that Kennedy administration take up civil rights as the national cause in the same manner that Roosevelt administration had enacted the New Deal during the Great Depression. Everybody's always going on and on about that New Deal. Recalling his trip to India and efforts to aid the untouchables, King suggested that black disenfranchisement required extraordinary measures to remedy, underscoring his support for affirmative action style programs that would become federal policy within a decade. He prodded the president to make good on a promise to end housing segregation with the stroke of a pen. Civil rights and the federal government were destined to be allies, he argued, although they would be forever locked in creative tension over the speed of unfolding political revolution. Man, chat was blowing up while I was reading that. You know, burn pits, it's like that.
Yeah, emotes are going off. What we have here, King gets right to work at criticizing the Kennedy administration. So equality now, the president has the power. He wrote this and said in no uncertain terms, the president can be doing this.
Right.
We can have equality now. And the president even said, you said you could do this with a stroke of a pen. Do it.
Do it.
Yeah, just do it. So he also chastises the federal government as being the largest investor in segregation. And this comes up later as well with James Farmer of CORE and Malcolm X as well, as correctly identifying that this is not simply a thing that like, oh, this is only happening in the South. They're slow to integration. They're doing this because this is all part of a federal funding program. So like, even though like, you know, the people in Washington or the people up north, the politicians up north can just look at this and be like, hey, we have nothing to do with this. In fact, it is an entirely federal system, and thus the entire federal system needs to be indicted. And They use this as well as leverage against the government.
Right. And, you know, for those in the know, the New Deal, Roosevelt did not even have, like, I think a precedent to rely on and to implement it. That was like a completely, like, new fucking thing.
Also, he does throw out here also that black disenfranchisement required extraordinary measures to remedy, meaning that, you know, all that shit that you'll hear Steven Crowder or all the colorblind bullshit that people try to put onto MLK, and as if he didn't propose social, economic, and political reparations that specifically target developed black communities, that is absolutely incorrect.
You know, a lot of the things that I think are in Gerald Horne's, like, not his newest book, but one of his newer books. I think it was like the 1865 Counter-Revolution or something, where Reconstruction is just completely abandoned, namely because now you have black people that are electing black representatives into government, right? And Washington can't have that. You can't have people, like, you know, having things like that.
So now we're going to... I'm sorry, it skipped. I didn't realize you weren't done.
Oh, did it?
No. Not that. No, I meant the audio skipped. I thought you were finished talking and you weren't, and I apologize for talking.
You're good. Don't worry about it. Let's.
Now we're gonna get into like probably one of the most, pivotal portions of this story, as well as the civil rights movement, which is the Freedom Rides. The Freedom Rides, inaugurated the next month by a group of baby-faced students who deeply admired both AFK and MLK, put civil rights squarely on the national agenda by precipitating confrontation between peaceful groups of interracial activists and violent white mobs. For students, activists, and politicians, King served primarily as a political mobilizer and a lightning rod. Raising enough money to maintain the SCLC's annual expenses of $84,000 required King to conduct grueling speaking tours, sometimes delivering 5 speeches in one day. But even though King was busy running the SCLC, journalists, politicians, segregationists, and anti-racists alike identified King as the leader of the Freedom Rides. The Freedom Rides boarded Greyhound and Trailway buses, 2 small groups of integrated passengers determined to journey through Dixie's heart to challenge racial segregation in travel facilities. On May 14th, 10 days after their initial departure from Washington, D.C., the Freedom Riders experienced spasms of racial violence in Anniston, Alabama, a vicious assault firebombing and bloody attack that made front page news nationally and around the world. White mobs attacked again in Birmingham, and reinforcements from universities around the country rushed to continue demonstrations that now forced the hesitant Kennedy administration into action. So while Kennedy was half-stepping about shit, there's about to be a national emergency that's going to choose him to kind of force a side in this issue. Not to jump ahead, but go ahead. We have a video next.
For all of, you know, the chatters and people watching our stream that, like, you know, looking to watch a stream about books, but, like, you know, need the videos.
We can't just read slides for fucking 4 hours. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, no,
and not only that, the book could be bullshit. There could be lies in the book. So we read the book, but then you add you know, adjacent videos and things like that just to kind of make it all come together.
Right.
Really ties it ties the room together.
Yeah, this isn't like the Protocols of the Elders of Zion.
I don't think it is. I'm not sure where that. Yeah.
This probably is the most significant thing that two people who are getting toward the end of their lives could do to hasten the time when in our own lifetime we might see America live up to its dreams.
We recruited the riders for the Freedom Ride by contacting all of our core chapters around the country. We were looking for a mix of black, white, young, middle-aged, older. We wanted to have one member of the clergy on the trip.
The Freedom Rides were trying to say to America, we are a diverse country. Let's act like a diverse country where every part of the diversity is equal and is treated equally. We started out with 14 Protestant ministers, 8 white and 6 black, and 4 Reform rabbis, and we wound up with 10 of us getting arrested.
We cannot submit to immoral laws which demand that we separate racially. Nor can we conscientiously avoid entirely the situation in which these segregationist laws operate contrary to laws of the land.
The Freedom Rides were not all just about black people. We had many whites and other nationalities and things who went along with what we were doing, and they were doing exactly what we were doing. They were allowing themselves to be abused in this effort.
Jesus Christ.
Part of the disbelief that people had around the country was the surprise in learning that just simple things like eating at a lunch counter at a bus station, if you did it interracially or if you went to the wrong waiting room, you could get beat up.
When we got to Birmingham, James Peck and I, we were scheduled to test the facilities. When we got in the terminal, the wall was surrounded by men, and they all came towards us. And they just started beating on us. And James went down almost immediately.
Again, chat, that's somebody's grandfather out there. Let us know if this is your grandpappy.
Immediately, the blood started running.
I felt a hard blow, and I was on the floor of the bus, face downward. Before long, somebody was on top of me. And then it seemed that we were both being kicked and pushed to the back of the bus.
The Freedom Riders introduced the notion that there were whites who were as enraged as we were about racism and about segregation.
One major significance of the Freedom Rides was its national character. It was interracial, it was interregional, it was secular and religious. It's a kind of tipping point in the history of civil rights struggle. It's a sense of empowerment that ordinary people can do extraordinary things. That's what the Freedom Rides were all about.
Is that Bernie Sanders?
Maybe.
2011, coming to May 16th, 2011. Any day
All
now. Oh, there we go. On Sunday, May 21st, 1961, King presided over an MIA-sponsored rally in support of the Freedom Riders in Montgomery, Alabama. The massive gathering of 1,000 people convened at Ralph Abernathy's First Baptist Church in the city's downtown. In attendance were several Freedom Riders who had experienced the violence in Anniston. Alabama's segregationist Governor John Patterson used the presence of the riders to amp up supporters, who interpreted Bobby Kennedy's use of federal marshals to partially escort riders away from conflict zones as government power run amok. Against this emotionally charged backdrop, King spoke to the congregation while a white mob gathered around First Baptist Church, turning a site of refuge into a potential ambush. Quote, "We will present our physical bodies as instruments to defeat the unjust system," King preached from the pulpit.
So yeah, so things are really heating up for the Freedom Riders. Not only just like civil gatherings, but also like formally, you have James Patterson, who was the governor of Alabama, essentially sanctioning this type of like militia violence against Freedom Riders. And then you have Dr. King, who is at this point in there to support the Freedom Riders and is essentially being trapped in the First Baptist Church by a white mob, saying that they will present our physical bodies as instruments to defeat the unjust system. So if you go ahead to the next video, this is like a shorter video, but this just kind of like talks about how violent things actually got for people who were engaging in the Freedom Rides. Also, it's important to note, just keep this in mind, CORE is the new civil rights organization. They didn't get a proper introduction. CORE is the is who organized the Freedom Rides, and CORE is the Congress of Racial Equity. CORE gets brought up a lot, so just remember CORE.
What does it stand for?
Congress of Racial Equality.
Huh, that's cool.
African Americans since the end of slavery have been treated in much of the country as a despised minority. They are forced to eat and use bathrooms separately from whites. James Farmer is the founder of the Congress of Racial Equality, known as CORE.
Yeah, there you go.
In order to understand how any Negro feels under segregation, you have to realize that from the time of infancy, he has it pounded.
Sorry, what did you say?
I said, remember this guy here, James Farmer of CORE, because he comes up later with Malcolm X.
Gotcha.
Into him that he's not as good as other people. There are things he cannot do. Don't do this, you can't do this, you can't do the other. It builds into a man a feeling of inferiority, a feeling of frustration, a feeling of resentment.
James Farmer and CORE want Kennedy to understand that segregation stains America's image around the world. CORE wants to test the Supreme Court ruling, long ignored in the South, that bans segregation in interstate travel. The plan is for black and white volunteers to ride together on buses. Journeys that CORE calls Freedom Rides. The riders commit themselves to nonviolence,
I want you to think it over very carefully, and if you feel
believing that challenging segregation peacefully will force the authorities to act.
we would be very happy to have you embark upon this dangerous, worthwhile, significant mission.
CORE prepares the riders for the racial hatred they can expect.
Hey, you, nigga. Do you hear what that man said? You hear what that man said? You get back there. Get back there. Get back, get back, get back. Excuse me. Hey. Come on.
Come on, get him back.
On May 4th, 1961.
Does that dude have like a lot of practice doing that? What the fuck?
Yeah, I thought the little training seminars were a little weird.
Oh shit, Cicero Fields, you were around for that?
Oh wow.
Yeah, oh my god, I literally I can't imagine that.
Sebs, that's a good point. It's like, hey, I've literally been dealing with this my entire life.
Yeah, like I really don't need this practice session for
and like you have to
racism.
call me the N-word while you're doing it. Like you're like, no, I just need it to be really real. I
Yeah,
just need you
we just need to see that you're prepared.
to...
It's like he just
Yeah, I
took
thought
this
that was...
he took this job as like an excuse to do this.
Yeah, just berate black people and pretend to beat them up.
Yeah, that's crazy, Cicero. You know, my parents were literally like born about like, you know, 15ish years after you, and it's just crazy for me to think about how like their marriage would have technically been illegal. Yeah. You know, like not even 10 years before they were born.
James Farmer leads 13 people, black and white, onto buses in Washington, D.C., bound for New Orleans. Jesus. 10 days later, the bus enters Alabama, home to the largest KKK organization in America. They know the riders are coming. In Anniston, the Klan surrounds the bus, slashing its tires. Photographer Joe Postolione captures these images. The crippled Greyhound tries to escape, but a few miles out of town, the Klan surrounds and firebombs it, with the riders still inside. The Freedom Riders do escape the bus, only to be beaten by the Klan. Joe's photos bring the Freedom Rides to international attention.
Thank you, Smithsonian. So now we can kind of really see the like immense rejection of these segregation
African Americans, since the end of slavery,
anti-segregation policies in the South. A little bit more on that. Is this me now? No, go back. Yeah, this is.
Yeah.
King called Bobby. Remember, Dr. King is currently trapped in the Baptist church, surrounded by a white mob. So Martin Luther King called Bobby Kennedy just after 10 p.m., seeking reassurances that federal marshals could protect those inside the church. Bobby's attempt at gallows humor, asking King to pray for us that those inside and outside the First Baptist would be unharmed, fell flat. King forcefully reiterated his fear that the entire church might be burned down. In the process, managed to convey the sense of personal terror that Bobby's comments had sought to deflect. The deputy marshals are coming, the attorney general explained, attempting to soothe an agitated King. The awkward exchange revealed the men's lack of personal chemistry and contrasting temperaments. King's raw vulnerability during the crisis exhibited the kind of emotion that made Bobby Kennedy uneasy. Similarly, the attorney general's ability to find dark humor against the backdrop of potential racial violence struck King as unseemly. Despite the rough start, several hours later, reinforcements in the guise of 1,000 national troops promised by Bobby Kennedy, begrudgingly sanctioned by Governor Patterson, arrived and dispersed the mob. So now you have, Martin Luther King calling in his Kennedy card and being like, you have to take action, and maybe somewhat reluctantly or, finally having their hand forced, the Kennedy administration utilizes federal marshals to disperse crowds that are reacting against the Freedom Rides.
Yeah, no, my impression of Bobby Kennedy is forever ruined by the second season of Blowback, where they discussed how, like, during the Cuban Missile Crisis or something, or Bay of Pigs, it was one of those things, but Bobby Kennedy was in the meeting just going like, why can't we just nuke them? Why don't we just nuke them? Let's just nuke them.
And everybody's like,
no, you can't just nuke them. Just because we have them, there's fallout.
Like, I'm just saying, if we have them, I don't know why we don't. What do we have them for? What do we have them for?
Let's just incinerate them. So,
sorry, this is a long one, but
the next day, 2 busloads of Freedom Riders departed Montgomery for Jackson, Mississippi under heavy guard. Jackson authorities promised to arrest them on arrival, and Bobby Kennedy hoped to convince the students to accept being bailed out by the Justice Department instead of remaining in jail, and therefore continuing to make national headlines. Before departing, the Freedom Riders, led by Nashville student leader Diane Nash, met with King to request that he accompany them to Jackson. King refused, citing the fact that he remained on probation from a Georgia traffic stop the previous year. A new arrest might plunge him into further legal turmoil. When some riders volunteered that they were pressing on to Jackson despite their own tenuous legal status, King dispatched with his lawyerly defense. He instead asserted the right to choose the time and place of his political showdown with the forces of segregation. His admiration for the courageous student activists stopped short of joining them, despite the disappointment it produced within activist circles that stretched far beyond Montgomery. King felt conflicted. The tumult of national events related to civil rights found him juggling multiple roles, at times unsuccessfully. The public, including the White House, considered him to be the singular figure behind demonstrations swirling across the country, even though King knew differently. Authorities credited King, like they had with Malcolm X, as the mastermind behind sprawling protests that he had no direct ties to. This perception granted King considerable power while also jeopardizing his image as an authentic champion of black struggle in the eyes of students and activists. Ultimately, King sought to assume a measure of control over events by refusing to place himself in harm's way for a demonstration that he did not originally organize.
So Freedom Riders going into Jackson, Mississippi, in a place that is extremely, wrought with anti-integration sentiment. Bobby Kennedy is hoping at this point to let them all get arrested and then let the federal government bail them out. And this is kind of like a wishy-washy way of playing both sides, essentially. He doesn't want to let them be martyrs and sit and languish in Mississippi jails, but also he feels that he has to. So he's like, oh, we'll bail them out. But also at the same time, we have like a double motive for bailing them out. Like, see, we're helping, but also we don't want to allow them to like continue being in headlines by being imprisoned for having this anti-segregation sentiment. Also, we see Dr. King further kind of like, digging his heels in away from actually getting his hands dirty on the front lines. This doesn't remain all the way through King's life, but again, the chapter started with this, and still to this point, people are calling on King, get out here, stand with us, be arrested with us. And he's like, I'm on probation. I don't know, I'm on probation.
I don't want to make it worse, then I can't go to any others in the future. You know what I mean?
Next one.
Next
Call me on the next one.
Rain check.
So go ahead.
I think like the other thing that I was gonna say is that like has the federal government followed through on any other things that
and marshals in response to an emergency, like where people could die.
Right. But like, if these people were to wind up in prison, like, can they actually rely on the federal government to bail them out? I mean, that's not something I would count on, you know what I mean? Like,
federal government has a vested interest in bailing them out because they don't want to make more of a debacle of the situation. So that's what Bobby Kennedy wants to do. That's why it's like a double motive. So this is the Mississippi footage. I'm going to let you know because there's a weird like musical interlude in this that we're going to skip because this is like a 10-minute long video. We're just going to do the beginning in the front where they're actually talking to people.
Screw it.
So remember, they're going from Montgomery to Jackson. This is the actual Jackson footage.
So this is somebody's grandpa or great grandpa.
This is like actual news footage. This isn't even like some like retroactive video essay. Listen to how crazy this sounds. I don't know if this is like produced in Mississippi, but listen to this.
This is the objective. The clean, modern bus station in Jackson, Mississippi. The battle lines are drawn, the defenses complete. The bus station, dwarfed by the downtown skyscrapers of Jackson, is guarded outwardly by the entire police force of the city. There are others around the corner. Plainclothes deputies wait. Just out of sight, troops are standing, the hot southern sun glinting on their fixed bayonets. For Jackson, Mississippi, the enemy is at the gates. The hour has come. The invaders are 14 Negro and white passengers on an inbound bus. They are vastly outnumbered, even by the reporters covering their journey. The armed might at the bus station waits not to fight, but to protect them from the white population. For unlike Montgomery, Alabama, Jackson, Mississippi has decided that by protecting them, they will also defeat them. But everyone, the police, the troops, the town, knows that the riders are only a symbol. The real invader is integration, and he has been long on the road to Mississippi. Other states have bowed to integration either partially or completely, but not Mississippi, not until now. What happened to bring these two forces together in a bus station, and why Jackson? Well, to find the answers, you must understand first something of the city and its people. The capital of Mississippi is a place where the past has full partnership with the present. Downtown Jackson is dominated by the old Capitol, built in 1833, where the voices of Henry Clay and Andrew Jackson once rang.
What?
Confederate memorials are real symbols not only of a century-old conflict, but of a present-day conflict, too.
Excuse me?
Downtown Jackson looks like any normal busy town, but people remind you that it was once called Chimneyville, because burned-out chimneys were all that was left after federal troops went through.
Yeah. Wonder
if you
why.
want to know how integration has been held outside Mississippi for this long, you must first call on the Citizens Council, an organization dedicated to states' rights and racial integrity. Support comes from Robert E. Lee, Stonewall Jackson, and 85,000 living white citizens of Mississippi. The overwhelming political power of the council is well demonstrated by the fact that it is partially supported by state taxes. Against this charged background, the issue came to a head. A bus carrying a mixed group of whites and Negroes started across the South with the announced intention of testing segregation in bus terminals, which had been ruled out by the U.S. Supreme Court. The bus was attacked in Alabama, its passengers injured. Next stop, Jackson. Mississippi had...
Wait, did he just mention the bus that was firebombed?
Mm-hmm.
And all he mentioned was, oh, passengers were injured?
Yeah. Yeah, the whole language of this is like completely like, oh, they bowed to integration. And like, you know what I mean? Like, you know, every single part of how this is framed is like, you know, obviously extremely anti-integration.
You have to, like, literally be just completely enveloped in racism. You might as well just have to be a Klan member or have, like, you know, a relative that you love dearly be a Klan member in order to, like, find this video at all. Like, you know, oh, well,
That's why
what about that? That is unreasonable.
Yeah, and that's why I'm so happy I found this, because a lot of the things that I'm finding are retrospectives, things that were made in probably in the internet age where somebody makes it, like, you know, puts things together. It's really interesting to find the actual documentary evidence of the time of, like, within the anti-integration sentiment.
Right.
Camp.
And notice how, like, you know, I don't think they mentioned anything about that, like, racial integrity board having, you know, being integrated. What, that was not a what would you call it? Like, you know, where both sides are kind of hurt.
Observed Alabama's handling of the riders and decided upon another course. The bus was loaded with armed troops and followed by 16 patrol cars and an airplane. All this at a cost of thousands of dollars a day. Jackson citizens watched by the hundreds, jostling each other for a better view. Swamped by the Khrushchev-like protection, the Freedom Riders stepped off...
The what-like protection?
Khrushchev-like protection that the Freedom Riders enjoyed there.
Bro, come the fuck on, man.
Yeah.
What?
The bus, some still bearing the bandages of their encounter with Alabama. They made their way through the surrounding crowd to the inside of the station. Some walked to a restroom marked white only, others to the white only coffee shop. A policeman ordered them to move on. They stood quietly. Another order, then each was arrested and led outside to a waiting paddy wagon. There was no official mention of segregation or integration. The charges were breach of the peace and inciting to riot. The trial was short. The sentence, a $200 fine, which was suspended. The suspension was refused, and the riders elected to work it out on the county jail farm. Observing Alabama teeming with federal marshals, Mississippi had devised a new method of handling the buses on their way.
So they get arrested. This is a tactic of the Mississippi State, is that we're going to arrest them and just cut them loose immediately. So that kind of like takes the wind out of the sails of the movement. So, and then now the Freedom Riders are denying the suspension. And they say, we want to go to county jail. We want to work this out on the farms. We don't want you to just suspend us. Because they're saying that they saw what happened in Alabama, where the bus was firebombed and the KKK were beating people and all this. And they had recognized that this was optical ammunition for the civil rights movement. And it's playing into, exactly what they're trying to accomplish by doing this. So they said, let's have a different tactic. Let's protect them from the violence. Wham, bam, thank you, man. Write them a ticket, send them on their way. But the Freedom Riders know what they're trying to accomplish here. So they are saying, no, we will do our time in the county. So this is much to the dismay of both the Mississippi State and Robert Kennedy. So if you can just move forward a little bit, like for some reason they just have this like long interlude of just this music with like B-roll footage playing. When you get a little bit further, like it's like a couple minutes further, just keep going. Keep going.
Oh, you don't want to see this? No, nothing.
Keep going. I don't want to waste all the time.
You don't want to listen to Dixie?
Just keep going. Keep going. You can go a little bit bigger jumps than this. Keep going. Keep going. They interview people at the end. Just keep going. You can do a little bit better.
I guess they were just looking for any excuse to use that recording of Dixie, huh?
Keep going.
Keep going?
Yeah.
Jesus Christ.
I think
Keep
they
going.
did
No,
a really good job.
there you go. There you go. So this is where they actually start filming, interviewing
I think
residents
they
of
did a
Jackson.
real nice
Okay.
job of
You
handling.
did it.
I think we like the way we are in Mississippi. We don't want it changed. We want the white people to be together and colored people together.
Oh, I think it was fine. I think all Mississippi did fine yesterday.
How do you feel generally about the Freedom Riders and groups like that coming through Mississippi?
I think they're just asking for trouble.
This is somebody's grandma.
Where they was at and just trying to stir up trouble. That's all it is. They should have stayed where they belong. I think they did a good job, and I believe that if the people, the public, would let the police force handle the situation, I believe that in Mississippi, integration would not be omitted.
Fine. I thought it was real good.
I did too.
What do you think about the Freedom Riders in general, about coming to Mississippi? How do you react to this?
I don't like it.
Why not?
Well, I just don't think it's right. If any people in Mississippi are ready for that, then they'll say they are.
You agree in this?
I think that we were better off before it started.
Well, we all think it was pretty good. I mean, there wasn't much trouble, you know. They just come in and they just shipped them right out as soon as they started trouble.
How do you feel about the Freedom Riders coming to Mississippi in the first place?
Well, I don't think none of us like it. I mean, I just think we ought to have open season on all of them.
What do you mean by open season?
Well, just to chase them all out.
Well, I don't know. I mean, it's not going to last too long before the people down here get a little antagonized with it, and they're going to take it into their own hands, I mean.
On the night of the trials, Negro leaders called a mass meeting at the Masonic Lodge, conveniently located on Lynch Street. 126 persons attended, demonstrating again the lukewarm Negro support. Of course, it should be noted that no Jackson newspaper, radio, or television station will carry any mention of Negro meetings, leaving the leaders no way of reaching their followers. Many Negroes also fear reprisals, economic or otherwise, if they attend.
air. If they'd been in the sea, they would have been covered by sea. And I'm of the opinion that they had sent something along to clear the land of all landmines just because a few freedom-loving people are seeking their constitutional rights. We must be a special people. But we would like to warn America of this and the rest of the world. The American Negro, the Negro in Mississippi, will never be satisfied until we enjoy every right that's afforded any other citizen of these United States.
All right. So now we can see kind of what the temperature was in places like Jackson, Mississippi, in terms of how they dealt with this and how they felt about this. Yeah, and like Frankster says, like this is the good old days that some people are talking about.
Yeah, this is the
And,
time period that all those rockabilly fucks keep like
yeah,
trying to
well,
revive.
that dude with the cut off shirt sleeves, where
Yeah.
he looked like, he kind of looked like the guy, Mr. Blonde from Reservoir Dogs, in a cutoff or something like that. Like that guy is like the prototypical, like I want to be a rockabilly guy. I'm gonna slick my hair like that, and I'm gonna
Yes.
cut the sleeves off my denim
Yes.
jacket.
I'm gonna
It
roll
is
up my.
wild.
I'm gonna keep my cigarettes in like the rolled up short sleeve.
Yeah.
You know.
And I'm gonna smoke Lucky Strikes for some reason.
Yeah, even though they taste like shit, and like he makes it a point to get the filterless.
Yeah. My grandfather, who was a sailor, he worked on tugboats in the Delaware River between Philly and Camden. I lived with him for a little while in my adult life while I was kind of like in between houses. I was struggling on drugs and things like that. But he would let me smoke his cigarettes, and he would smoke filterless Eagles. I don't know if you ever even heard of the type of cigarette called Eagles, but he smoked filterless Eagles, and he pretty much would let me have as many of them as I wanted. So I had quite the taste for filterless Eagles for a little while in like 2010. So I know what that guy was feeling like. I know what it's like to live in Mississippi. Is this
Fuck.
you?
Sure. King's role as an intermediary between the Freedom Riders and the Kennedy administration increased after the activists departed Montgomery on Wednesday, May 24th. Bobby Kennedy, who hoped to avert another crisis or at least remove the protests from the headlines, was dismayed when police arrested 27 riders attempting to use segregated facilities inside the Jackson bus depot. His efforts to bail out those arrested were thwarted by the Freedom Riders' decision, modeled after Gandhi, to stay in jail as a declaration of conscience against Jim Crow. After releasing a statement to the press advocating a cooling off period from further demonstrations, Bobby Kennedy called King, demanding to know why the riders insisted on remaining in jail. King succinctly described the students' thinking as resistance based on a moral obligation to accept the penalty, words the Attorney General interpreted as a threat. The fact that they stay in jail is not going to have the slightest effect on me, he responded. They'll stay, said King, ending the conversation. King's resolve and the Freedom Riders' actions compelled the Attorney General to act, which he did the following Monday by ordering the Interstate Commerce Commission to end segregation in all travel facilities. Although the riots continued, interest in the spectacles of violence that greeted the first wave waned.
Right. So you see Bobby Kennedy, probably representing the thoughts of, John F. Kennedy as well, is trying to play both sides on this. Like, yeah, we support you, help them out, but why do they have to stay in jail? Do they have to do this? I'm getting raked over the coals in the headlines here. You're breaking my balls. Yeah, I'm not doing a Bobby Kennedy impression right now. But you know what I mean? Like, pretty much
you're breaking my balls, King. Why you gotta keep doing it? What do you mean they want to stay in jail? Why do they want to do that?
But you do see that this strategy does bear fruit, and Bobby Kennedy does order the Interstate Commerce Commission to end segregation in all travel facilities. So they are making progress, but there was still violence. There was still citizen response to this. Unfollowed for mass homophobia. My family's from Salem. My father's side of my family is actually from Salem, Mass, and they talk like that.
I had no idea.
I love them dearly.
I've known you for 10 years and I never knew this.
Well, my grandfather's side of the family, they lived in Camden County, New Jersey, our whole life. But
And your family reunions with like between the Delco accent and the Boston accent has got to be just like
it's lit.
wild.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
All
And
right, so-
first time chatter, Noor, right? It's wild seeing people say it on camera. Yeah, I mean, there's really not that big a difference between then and, you know, what is probably still moderately common in these regions today. I mean, especially considering, like, you know, the reactions that people are having to things like Black Lives Matter, you know, things going on related to transphobia in America, and then there's just, like, you know, immigration in general, right? It's really not that shocking. But welcome aboard. Glad to have you.
Yeah. Oh, Dave said Nora's good people. You
Oh.
come highly recommended. Dave's word is good here.
Yeah, they got that southern kindness where it's like, you know, they'll stab you with a smile. You know what I mean?
All right, so
I
continuing
have
on
been
here,
a call-in
since the
on
success-
C-SPAN.
Since the success of the Montgomery bus boycott, King's primary role has been the movement's spokesperson, ad hoc behind the scenes negotiator, faith leader, and public intellectual. But King had grown weary of entering political campaigns only at the flashpoint of crisis. He sought to change these circumstances by forcing the SCLC to adapt to a shifting national landscape. One of King's biggest talents was his ability to mobilize already motivated populations of Black people in search of justice. Now he looked for the perfect opportunity to do just that. On Monday, October 16, 1961, 7 months after King's initial request, President Kennedy finally met with him at the White House. So if you recall, they've already been having clandestine secret meetings because JFK will not meet him publicly. So now they finally achieved, after the freedom rides and everything like that, JFK will have Martin Luther King at the White House, despite King being instrumental in him getting the White House, essentially. The meeting came 5 weeks after King published a New York Times essay comparing the activism of the Freedom Riders to liberation movements spreading across Africa. He reported that Black students told him that just as African brothers can break the bonds of colonialism, surely the American Negro can break Jim Crow. Black high school and college students' extraordinary willingness to fill the jails as if they were honor classes, and their disciplined commitment to nonviolence in the face of brutality exemplified a new kind of political revolution. Following a meeting with Bobby Kennedy, King urged the president to formally announce a second Emancipation Proclamation, a gesture he felt would move beyond symbolism by throwing the full weight and prestige of the presidency behind the movement. Kennedy declined to announce a new Emancipation Proclamation or propose a comprehensive civil rights bill, arguing that political opposition in Congress was too great. He eased the disappointment of this response with an offer to show King his private second-floor residence, a tour led by First Lady Jacqueline Kennedy. What we have here is King trying to be more forceful, saying that you've only given us token concessions, only symbolism. You have not given us anything material at this point, as you promised us as you were running for president. We want a second Emancipation Proclamation. And we also want like a fully comprehensive civil rights bill. And Kennedy declined and said, I can show you my private second floor residence.
That's
how about that?
That's the breaks there, fella. I don't know.
For some reason, I was like,
that's
is
the
this
breaks
trying
there,
to...
kid.
Yeah. So let's go forward. There's actually a little bit of a clip of Martin Luther King talking about this that is relevant here. I don't want to play this entire clip because at the end, it's 3 clips spliced together. And the last one is about like Kennedy's assassination. We don't need to get there yet.
Okay.
But just at the beginning, he talks about this specific second Emancipation Proclamation.
President Kennedy has done some significant things in civil rights, but at the same time, I must say that President Kennedy hadn't done enough, and we must remind him that we elected him. But I think the time has come for the President of the United States to sign an executive order outlawing segregation or declaring it unconstitutional on the basis of the 14th Amendment of the Constitution.
Yes, I had a very fruitful visit with the President. I discussed with him some of the problems that we are facing in the South and tried to report some of the conditions firsthand that we face in the South at this time. He listened very sympathetically, and we had a most fruitful and rewarding discussion together. Well, I discussed some of the problems in Mississippi that we are facing at this time, the problems in Macomb, Mississippi, and also many of the problems that students are facing in seeking to get Negro citizens in the South registered and voting. Also, I proposed to the President an idea that I have been discussing for several weeks now, and that is a need for a sort of second Emancipation Proclamation declaring all segregated facilities unconstitutional and illegal on the basis of the 14th Amendment of the Constitution. Just as the first Emancipation Proclamation was an executive order, I don't think it is too much to ask for a second Emancipation Proclamation bringing an end to segregation almost 100 years after the first Emancipation Proclamation was issued. Also, I suggested the need for an executive order in housing as a specific executive order because so much of housing, most of the housing financing falls under the federal government, either through FHA, PHA, urban renewal, or veterans loans. And this is one area where we need an executive order. And as long as there is housing segregation, as I said to the President, we will have segregation in public schools, we will have segregation in recreational facilities and all areas, so that this is a pressing need, and I think it would solve a great problem if we could get such an order.
Thought? It was one of
He's
the
talking
most...
about assassination, and that's so far out of the context of what we need to be talking about here.
Unrelated.
So, you can see Martin Luther King is not
President
the pittance that he's being offered by the president that he helped get elected, and he is coming directly at his neck, asking for these things, and also going public on the pulpit and saying, you know, President Kennedy, you can do these things. We want you to do these things. President Kennedy is not doing enough for black people.
I mean, you could say that instead of the neck, he's going straight for the head.
Oh, gunning at the head. Yep.
Right, his big
this is me, right?
Irish dome. Yeah.
Okay. So the time had come, King pleaded, for an executive order outlawing all forms of segregation, just like we heard him say. In America, to reporters, King recounted telling Kennedy details about voting rights efforts waged by SNCC in tiny and racially volatile Macomb, Mississippi. That video specifically. The cordial tone of King's remarks bellied their clear political intention. King, the social leader, positioned himself as a black statesman capable of pressuring the Kennedy administration into committing public support for the civil rights movement. King believed that racial justice required more than new laws. The birth of a new American age required the transformation of hearts and minds, a quest that King now embarked on to teach the president, the attorney general, and the entire nation the depth and breadth of an unfolding social revolution that he endeavored to remain at the center of.
That's just his accent, Redmond Barry.
Yeah, no, I probably just said it wrong. That's all good. Good.
Trying to give you cover, but whatever. Malcolm X debated Bayard Rustin on the subject of separation or integration at Howard University 2 weeks after King's meeting with Kennedy. The event was a watershed moment in the evolving racial consciousness of young black student activists galvanized by the sit-in movement. SNCC's campus affiliate at Howard, the Nonviolent Action Group, helped to organize the event. Stokely Carmichael, Still recovering from over a month spent in Mississippi's Parchman Farm Penitentiary for his service as a freedom rider helped to recruit students to attend the debate. Most of the politically active students in attendance expected Rustin to win handily. They knew him as an outspoken organizer, pacifist, and advisor to A. Philip Randolph, which is kind of like MLK's predecessor, if you weren't here for previous episodes. And more importantly, Martin Luther King Jr. Wait, what? And more importantly, Martin Luther King Jr., Rustin also expected to win. In the run-up to the debate, he informed Malcolm that he would attack him for having no political, social, or economic program for dealing with the problems of blacks. Malcolm was up to the challenge. "I'll take you up on that," he responded.
So here's another issue where there's a brief mention of Malcolm X debating Bayard Rustin in the previous chapter. So I included this video in there. We got about halfway through it, and it turns out that this conversation is way more pivotal than was mentioned before. It just mentioned Malcolm having a couple debates with people around King, but this, and you can even read it there, this had an indelible effect on someone like Stokely Carmichael, who began his kind of civil rights career, if you want to call it that, in SNCC, in this nonviolent advocacy group, and then Stokely Carmichael takes a decidedly more radical turn towards politics, and you can probably chart a direct line from that radical change to him hearing Malcolm X debate Bayard Rustin. So I figured I would include it in here again, and maybe this time we'll watch the second half of it, because remember we watched 8 minutes of it in the first hand. Let's just watch the second half of it, because apparently this is very important, and we can listen to the other half. And
So the debate that was mentioned in the last chapter, this is the same debate that it was talking about then? All right.
Mm-hmm.
Because I know they debated on more than one occasion, right?
They took this on the road.
Oh, damn.
They'll talk about that next.
They did this weekly.
Yeah. And I was going to skip this as I was reading through and making the slide, but it gets referenced so much that I was like, I just can't in good conscience leave this part out.
How much of this are we going to watch? Because this is 16 minutes long.
I would just put it at 8 minutes and then go from there, because we watched about half of it last time and then just let it roll.
That our only hope is not integration with a doomed society, but complete separation from a doomed society. South Africa practices what it preaches. Russia practices what it preaches. Franco Spain practices what it preaches. It's a dictatorship. It doesn't preach freedom. South Africa doesn't preach freedom. Russia doesn't call itself the leader of the free world. It's America that looks upon herself and represents herself as the leader of the free world, while she has 20 million black people here who aren't even citizens. 20 million black people here. How can you and your government leaders stand up in the United Nations and point the finger at South Africa for practicing what it preaches? It preaches apartheid and it practices apartheid. It preaches the inferiority of the races and it practices the inferiority of the races. Whereas you preach one thing and practice another thing. You say that this is a land of equality and 20 million of your black citizens, so-called citizens, don't have equality. You say that this is the land of freedom and 20 million black people here don't have freedom. You say that this is a land of justice and 20 million black people here don't have justice. And the government, from the Supreme Court, the Senate and the Congress and the President on up or down, is not able in combined to bring about any change in the attitude of white America toward black America. God is God. He's the same God that the Hebrews worshiped, the same God that the Christians worship, and the same God that the Muslims worship. You call him Christ, they call him Jehovah, we call him Allah. Just as Jehovah was absent while the Hebrews were suffering under Pharaoh, didn't mean he was asleep. It meant that he had given Pharaoh an opportunity to rise to a powerful position economically, politically, militarily, so that he could become so powerful that the then unknown God would make himself known by destroying that powerful nation. And if you read your Bible, I think that you will agree that this is the case. God told Pharaoh, "It is for this cause that I raised you up. It is for this cause that I myself bless you and your nation to become as powerful as it is." You've become so powerful, now you think you're God. And you have my people in your clutches. So I will prove that I'm God by taking the ones that you look down upon and elevating them while I destroy you. And your only way to avoid that destruction is to submit to these same people whom you in the past have been making submit to you.
That he has not got it. It is also that the black Muslims have put forth, as you ought to know, no concrete program except speaking on 125th Street. Now, if I put the kneel-ins against merely speaking on the street, at least that's a program. Come up with a better one.
If white immigrants can come to this country 50 years ago with nickels and dimes and no education, and come here and pool their little nickels and dimes and no education, and set up little stores, develop these stores into larger stores, develop this into an industry which creates job opportunities for whites. Since Lincoln was supposed to have freed the black man 100 years ago, and today the black man, according to the government economists, has spending power of $20 billion per year. We feel that with the black man spending $20 billion a year, not setting up any businesses, not creating any industry, not creating any job opportunities for his own kind, he's not in a moral position to point the finger today at the white man and tell the white man that he's discriminating against him for not giving him a job in factories that he himself set up. If the black man has $20 billion, and these so-called Negro leaders are such geniuses that they can integrate white restaurants and integrate white factories and force themselves into that which the white man has set up, they should use this same ingenuity to show the black people how to pool our wealth and set up something of our own. And then we won't have to force our way into his anymore. One more thing I would like to point out concerning what he said about 125th Street. We don't waste our time on 125th Street, but you can reach more people in the street who want to change than you can in the bourgeoisie society, the bourgeoisie church, and the bourgeoisie circles. Our program is directed toward the man in the street. So we spend our time in the street, and what we do with that man, instead of trying to change the white man and your mind and make you accept us, we change the mind of the black man and make him accept himself. And as soon as he accepts himself, he'll solve his own problem. He won't be trying to force himself into your factory and into your bedroom and into your kitchen. Eisenhower, a couple months ago, referred to the situation that the West faces as Armageddon in a speech in Chicago before some distinguished Republicans, if there are such. And he referred to this crisis that America is facing as Armageddon because of the nuclear-tipped missiles that are poised all over the earth. If this destruction is ever turned loose on America, the Negro has no fallout shelters. And white people who have them, you won't even let Negroes in white neighborhoods during peacetime. How will he get in your fallout shelter during wartime? You haven't yet desegregated New Rochelle. How are you going to let Negroes, when you're under attack, into a space that you yourself hardly have room in? Why, you're crazy if you think we even think that you will. So we're not relying on fallout shelter. We're not relying on air raid shelter. As I said earlier, we're relying on God. When God destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah with fire, and brimstone, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad teaches us that that's only a symbolic story designed to paint a prophetic picture of what America is faced with today. because of the immorality and indecency and corruption that exists in all levels of American society, God has doomed America for destruction. The only salvation or escape is through God and with God. This is what we teach. And despite the fact that we tell you that we rely 100% upon our God to protect us against the trouble that you have gotten yourself in. You didn't get us in this. It's trouble that you have gotten yourself in. If you notice, whenever I refer to America, I don't say we. I don't say I or our. I say you. This is yours. It's not me or mine. And you'll find that this thinking is increasing among black people today. They don't say our government, our president, our Senate, our Congress, nor do they say our troubles. They say your president, your Congress, your Senate, and your troubles. We get closer to God, as Dr. Rustin said, by stripping ourselves.
So,
the second half of that was a little light on old Rustin, but old Bayard. But still, you can kind of see like this is a little bit more about Malcolm than it is about Bayard, because Malcolm's performance here, people thought that he was going to get destroyed by Bayard Rustin, like that, debate bro of the century type thing. Like, he's going to get destroyed. And Malcolm came in there as a firebrand and delivered speeches like that. And I guess pretty much said, I'm out here on 125th Street and you're up there, and then bourgeois, this and that. And
that's the thing though, is that like Bayard Rustin has been doing this since like the 40s, right? You know, and he's a pacifist, and he's, a communist, and, so on and so forth. You gotta remember, during the 40s, like, Malcolm X was, in prison pretty much, and he's now
on his way to prison, essentially, yeah.
Right, on his way to prison. And doesn't have the same tenure as Bayard. But, like, it is...
He was out with Red Fox.
Yeah.
He was out with Red Fox ripping off white boys like me for bad weed.
For, real shitty weed. He said bourgeoisie, but yeah, no, he was using that as to berate, Rustin for, like, the company that he keeps as an alleged communist. Sinchal, I'm really interested to see what you disagree with. Malcolm X as a right-wing fundamentalist or left-wing.
I think that was it.
He was religious.
Certainly a lot of conservative values from Malcolm X, absolutely. And we've covered that in previous chapters.
I don't believe it was a shot at Sodom and Gomorrah. I don't believe that was a shot at Rustin's sexuality.
I think he was talking about the American society as a whole being like doomed for like a cleansing of some metaphorical kind. But also, if you want me to be honest with you, I would not be surprised if there was some extremely homophobic sentiments that Malcolm X had while he was part of the Nation of Islam.
True.
I would almost, if you asked me to make a bet on if he held homophobic sentiment during that time, I would bet my money on yes. And that's just me being honest.
I mean, this is a guy that, like, it already has, like, plenty of, misogynist, views and stuff, a lot of daddy issues, so to speak,
It's a religion. He's part of a religious organization. It's not a crazy assumption to assume that they had, regressive views on homosexuality. I mean, right. I would assume that.
Right. And if he were to even have personal, feelings towards it, he's not going to display those. He's going to display, like, the teachings of Elijah Muhammad at this time. He's going to follow and toe the line that Elijah Muhammad, proselytizes, because at the end of the day, he is still pretty much technically a preacher, but for Islam.
Mm-hmm.
Malcolm said, if you read your Bible, I think you'll agree. So I responded. Yeah, no, I mean, like...
I do not agree. I see what you're saying.
Oh, okay. Sorry. The idea of God condemning the USA appeals to the right and the left, apparently. Well, I mean, like, for very different reasons. Like, and, but that's, like, the thing about interpretation and interpretation of faith, especially, It's never going to, and even interpretation of like socialism. I mean, that's how you wind up with people that think that the Soviet Union was not socialist, and Vietnam not socialist, China especially never socialist, but the first 4 years of the Soviet Union were socialist. It's all about where are you getting this analysis from? And the reason why we're going over this book, right? And why this book goes over the early history of Malcolm and Martin is so that we have a context of where is he getting his perspective from, right? For both of them. And this man is getting his perspective from I assume what everyone else in chat would probably look at and say, oh, that's a cult.
Yep.
Considering right-wing fearmonger today about the fall of America because of trans people. Trust me, it's something that is bothering me a lot lately. Especially the murder of that child in England. I believe her name was Brianna. It's yeah, it's fucking me up, and I'll do like a deep dive of it when I can, but it's really deeply disturbing the amount of bills in every state that they are trying to force through the books to basically make, even if they are blessed to have parents that are accepting of them, and try and give them a life that they can be themselves, and might face jail time in certain states. MLK used the motif, "You've become too arrogant, God will break the backbone of your power." I think Malcolm said the same with his Egypt story. Yeah, pretty much. I mean, that's the whole thing about this book, Comrade Pesci, is that they were more alike than they were different.
One of the
And I don't know, as much as anybody wants to say that oh, that was a jab at Rustin's sexuality, I think that they went out on the road. They seem to have at least this book says that they seem to have a very friendly relationship.
So okay, so this is me, right?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. More than 2,000 people turned out for the debate, moderated by the eminent Howard University sociologist E. Franklin Frazier. Rustin characterized Malcolm's proposal of racial separatism as impractical. If this ship sinks, what possible chance do you think your separate state would have? Rustin asked. Malcolm pushed past the practicalities of the Nation of Islam's philosophy and focused on the struggle for black dignity. One, he claimed racial integration denied. The black man in America will never be equal to the white man as long as he attempts to force himself into his house, Malcolm retorted. Both speakers received loud cheers during parts of the debate. However, Malcolm's performance touched students and faculty in a visceral and unexpected way. Howard will never be the same, said one professor after listening to the debate. I feel a reluctance to face my class tomorrow. Stokely Carmichael, who sat in the front row in all of both speakers, remembered the occasion as an inflection point when nationalism took its firm root in SNCC. Malcolm's presence at Howard inspired black students who equated freedom with racial integration to reconsider their position. The Muslim leaders' talk of racial pride, political self-determination, and black solidarity motivated a generation of young activists to imbibe large quantities of black history, investigate the significance of African decolonization, and reimagine the meaning of African American identity in Western culture.
Yeah, I recently listened to an episode of the Decolonized Buffalo podcast, where he talks with his guest about this very issue of black sovereignty, within decolonization, right, and what that looks like and stuff like that. And I'm hoping that at some point in the future that we may read some works by Fanon, right? And any other relevant reading. So who knows what may come up, but I do plan on wanting to read something related to this, especially since we are pro indigenous sovereignty on this Twitch stream. By the way, thanks for doing real history on Twitch despite my corrections and criticisms. Hey, that's why we're here. You know, we saw a gap and we aim to fill it. You know, and for anybody else out there that like thinks they can do it better than us, by all means, like and for any other like Twitch streamer out there watching, on Fridays we're more than open to having guests on, discussing all sorts of things. But Sundays and Wednesdays we read out of books.
Yeah.
From
And we, I don't know, I'm not saying we're the best at doing this or anything like that, but we're doing it. And, there's plenty of books to go around. If anybody else wants to do this, there's plenty of books and plenty of topics that I think everybody would be interested in doing these kind of deep dive analyses on. So we're only two people. We can only do so many books. You know what I mean? Plenty of books out there for anybody that wants to do this type of like real history analysis. So as we said here, we're seeing Malcolm X having a very, very significant impact on the SNCC organizing committee. So go ahead.
Yeah, that and also it's interesting the influence that Malcolm X has on a young Stokely Carmichael, because Stokely Carmichael, out of like the combination of politics that like that MLK and Malcolm X's legacy would leave, right? Stokely Carmichael is like one of the big names that like you gotta at least watch a couple videos of him speaking. He later goes by the name Kwame Ture, but like that's for Rustin, these events showcased his usefulness to the movement. Even as he remained prone to being sidelined from major organizations, Malcolm too benefited. His reputation further enhanced every time a semi-respectable Negro leader dared to venture with him into the debating arena. Howard also opened up a new points of contact between Malcolm and the Black student movement. Exposure to Malcolm forced university students to reconsider the political framework the struggle for racial justice operated in. He introduced them to a new way of fighting for black dignity without apology, offering a critical lens for viewing issues of race, democracy, and citizenship to student activists eager to listen. Malcolm enthralled them by repudiating the idea that black freedom by necessity should rely on proximity to white power. Instead, he suggested an alternative reading of American history. I wonder who else is giving us an alternative reading of history today. One where black life only mattered to the extent that African Americans themselves recognized their intrinsic value and organized institutions, political movements, and unity around this concept. Black power, according to Malcolm, would be located in the last place the racial integrationists cared to look, in the very heart of the black community.
Yeah, and this is such like a compelling point that Malcolm's making, because we're watching all the freedom rides and we're watching the sit-ins at the Woolworths and we're watching the Montgomery, the boycotts of the buses and all these various types of demonstrations. And he's saying like, why do you want to force your way into a white man's business? You know what I mean? Like, your liberation is not contingent upon being allowed into a structure built by white people for white people. You know what I mean? Like, this should be happening irrespective of whatever these white people that are treating you like dog shit are doing. And I'm not saying that I am just like believing in one side or the other, like, because I think that both, you know what I mean, like I'm not here to be like I'm a team Malcolm or I'm a team MLK, like this is Twilight or something like that. Like I'm saying like this is like
that's both the example that you use.
Well, I don't know, it just made me think like that's what they did, right?
Have you ever watched the Twilight movies?
I've never watched one. No.
Oh, they're great, man.
Do you have a better example?
No. That one's amazing. I'm not touching that one. I love that example now. I think that
I think Seb's liked it.
Good. Sebs should love it. Fucking look. Just a quick aside, okay? For anybody that's never watched the Twilight movies,
everybody else got it. Everybody else in chat got it.
Yeah. All right. Look. So for anybody else that's never like seen the Twilight movies, but you like shonen anime, right? Twilight, the first one, is probably one of the greatest comedies ever written, and the rest of the movies literally are just a shonen anime.
Hey, Freak Museum. Welcome to the chat.
The
Thank
fact
you for
that
the
debates
contribution.
legitimize both speaker goes to show why you should never debate a fascist. Also, hello.
Yeah, because and to your point in this debate bro thing, they brought Malcolm in not thinking that he would win, and he ended up changing quite a lot of hearts and minds just off. I think he's correct on a lot of his things, but also just on his rhetoric, just his ability to be able to command a stage can change a lot of people's minds.
Well, I think that like they're both right and wrong in that look, it's not as if integration into white structures of power. Those white structures of power are unequal in and of themselves, right? And I think that you can succinctly put it just as that. Malcolm could have literally beat Rustin. That are you gonna try and tell me that white society is balanced? And oh, thank you so much, Sinchow, for the 5 gifted subs.
Well, that's Hash.
No, that's Hash Kush. Oh my God, I'm sorry. I don't know why I
saw
Hash
Kush. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I'm thanking the wrong fucking person.
You are an absolute angel, Hash Kush, that descends upon this stream and just blesses us consistently. And I don't know if we would be where we are today if it was not for the allyship that we have with the almighty Hash Kush.
Yeah, we're just talking about the 4th chapter of The Sword and the Shield, A World on Fire. And also, he was literally the president for 4 years, largely off the strength of his ability to mutilate other people. Are we talking about Trump?
There's sub-debate. Yeah, you missed it. So you're past it. There's an internal debate going on in chat. Just let that happen.
I mean, fine. I'll let it happen. But here's the thing about Trump is that in order to understand Trump, you need to understand where the culture of America was at, along with their financial or economic place where they were at. Nothing had changed for anyone. Bernie had been rat fucked out of any path to the White House. So of course they're gonna go for the TV man, the TV entertainer guy is gonna be the guy they vote for, because people in America can no longer differentiate between reality fucking TV and reality itself. No one was happy with liberals, and Trump knows how to cut a promo. I mean, he was on WWE, right?
Yeah. All right, so this is go back. We didn't read that one.
Did I? I thought we did finish.
Oh yeah, we did. I'm sorry. You're right.
You're good.
Good job. Keeping me on my toes. So while Malcolm made small but significant inroads among groups of students dedicated to nonviolent civil disobedience, King's passion for turning local civil rights struggles into a national racial justice movement drew him 10 days before Christmas to the tiny southwest Georgia city of Albany, pronounced Albany by locals, where SNCC organizers and local activists sparked a movement called from the efforts to test out the ICC's desegregation rule in the wake of the Freedom Rides. After students protested the maintenance of segregated facilities at the city's trailway bus stations, local activists formed the Albany movement, which featured members of the NAACP, SNCC, and local civil rights groups. The movement vowed to eradicate racial segregation in every corner of the city, pursue economic justice for its beleaguered African-American community, and end police brutality. If anybody remembers, well, you should remember, it was just a couple slides ago, because of the persistence of Dr. King and the activists, Bobby Kennedy finally relented and said, we're going to force the ICC to desegregate all travel facilities. So it says here that they are going to test that desegregation in Albany. And
I'm sure it went great. I'm sure nothing happened bad in Albany. Albany, Georgia.
Nothing bad ever happened in Georgia again.
Nothing bad ever happened to black people in Georgia, right? King's arrival in Albany on December 15th briefly turned the town, whose 26,000 black residents made up a third of its population, into the most watched city in the world. That evening, King delivered a rousing address to 1,000 at a mass meeting in a local church. Quote, all over the South, we must continue to engage in creative protests to break down the system of segregation, he insisted. The next day, King, along with Ralph Abernathy, joined a demonstration, getting arrested and pledging to remain in jail during Christmas if racial justice did not come to Albany. Behind the scenes, negotiations with the local officials resulted in a weekend jail stint in Americus, 60 miles from Albany, for King, who was freed after an agreement that released 700 jailed protesters. Promises to Albany white city officials to desegregate the city were quickly disavowed. 5 days after Christmas, Albany turned into a public relations setback for King, with newspapers praising Albany Police Chief Laurie Pritchett's successful strategy of mass arrests that absent violence lent a civilized air to Jim Crow's continued practice. King returned to Atlanta in time to celebrate the Christmas he had vowed to spend in jail, privately distraught over political circumstances that raged beyond his control.
So again, they're getting a little bit smarter, the segregationists. They know that if they just unleash the KKK and let them beat people and firebomb people, this is creating headlines. It's making them look uncivilized. Now they're like, to quote Dr. Martin Luther King, turning the other cheek in a certain way where it's like, oh yes, you have this organized civil disobedience. We'll give you like a little slap on the wrist. Nobody's going to spend Christmas in jail. We'll let 700 of you go, which seems like a win in one column because Martin Luther King is commanding this immense influence where he can get 700 people arrested and just let go, but also it's deflating the overall movement and also lending an air of credibility to Jim Crow that it's civilized, it's not barbaric. They're just like, oh, come on, get out of here. Shoo, you pesky, black people, just go back to the other bus stations. And if you go forward, there's a video, like a 5-minute video about the Albany situation.
Albany. Oh, wait, no, I don't want to open it there. I want to open it here. The real American founding, a conversation. Wait, is this an ad?
Yes.
Yeah, I figured. Son of a bitch almost got me.
The Albany movement begins in the middle of 1961. The people of the city of Albany, like many Americans...
Wait a second, why are they pronouncing it like Albany, New York? I thought it was Albany. What is this shit? You're making me look like a fucking idiot.
Americans throughout the South have grown increasingly impatient with segregation, increasingly impatient with the pace of change. Particularly in Albany, the young people were inspired by the changes that had been occurring throughout the South. Specific examples of those changes would be the Nashville movement, where students desegregated lunchroom counters. The fact that in other southern cities change was occurring galvanized and mobilized blacks and whites in and around Albany, Georgia, to do something about their city. And what made the Albany movement so bold and so unique was that the activists in Albany decided that they were not going to undertake to desegregate one institution or one facility at a time. They were going to try to desegregate everything at once. Led by SNCC, they would have public marches to protest segregation. They knew that those public marches would attract news reporters with cameras who would film their actions as well as write about their actions. They invited Dr. King to come down because of his national and really international visibility. They understood that if Dr. King marched with them, if Dr. King went to jail with them, then they would take the Albany movement to an entirely different level. They would engage a wider national and international audience. So Dr. King did come and he did participate in the Albany movement. Their long-term goal was obviously to desegregate everything. Their short-term goal was during these protests, during these sit-ins, to have confrontations with police officers. They wanted policemen to get a little violent with them. They wanted to show the hostility, the aggression of the local police and of segregationists. And they wanted to show how it was very powerful to return that kind of violence with nonviolence. What they didn't expect was a police force that had studied their tactics, that had studied the writings of Dr. King, that had studied the writings of Mohandas Gandhi. Led by police officer Laurie Pritchett, the police tried to be very dignified and respectful to the activists in front of the cameras, so that the confrontations that were filmed and photographed lacked the drama of the confrontations that we see in places like Birmingham and in places like Montgomery. Dr. King came and went several times during the Albany movement, which lasted between 1961 and 1962. Ultimately, much of Albany was desegregated. Nevertheless, many insiders as well as historians of the civil rights movement feel that the Albany movement was a failure because there was no dramatic moment when all of the walls fell, so to speak, and all of the rules changed. The rules about Jim Crow changed gradually, and some of them well after Dr. King had moved on to Birmingham, well after the years of 1961 to 62. But the conclusion one can draw from the Albany movement is that as far as the local citizens of Albany who were involved in the movement action are concerned, that movement was a success. A success because it gave individuals in Albany, many of whom had experienced in their families generations of Jim Crow, the understanding that they could, as individuals, change their communities. The Albany movement gave local people a sense of voice and visibility that many of them had never had before.
So tell me that doesn't remind you of
I think that,
what?
Oh, I was going to say, Freak Museum, they said, oh, they still do this. They did this a shitload during the BLM protest.
Yeah.
I think that's a really good point to bring up here is that, like, so this, like, air of civility that the police are taking as they're using a very tender hand with the demonstrators, knowing that the more violent they are, the worse optically it is for the state or the police force. I think that's actually very, interesting, especially to apply to it in a contemporary sense, that the police force is absolutely aware of optics, and they can absolutely strategically relent on maybe some of the more oppressive tactics and methodology. So that is always something to keep in mind, because we have a precedent for that here during the anti-segregation protests.
I wonder if anybody was like old enough, like in the police force, to be like, no. We need to kneel with them. I'm telling you, it worked in Albany. Like, this is what you do. And then once the cameras leave, then we start, like, gassing, shooting, and, like, striking them. So, in March 1962, Malcolm debated James Farmer, the Corps leader who had spent time in Mississippi jail. Malcolm denounced the pursuit of racial integration as morally and politically bankrupt. Quote, "I'll never take part in a sit-in because if someone forces me with a club or attacks," he said, "I would have to rely on my equality, my God-given rights, and use the same force in retaliation." See, Malcolm X was actually a Satanist. Malcolm insisted that black people had the right to defend their lives against racial terror. "We don't want to integrate with someone who says one thing and preaches another," he told Farmer. Malcolm conceded that he could support racial integration, quote, "if it restored human dignity for black folk. But if it doesn't, out the window with integration and let's get another method." Malcolm expressed open skepticism about some black people's confidence in the white man and democratic political institutions. Civil rights activists believe they can change you, believe there is still hope in the American dream, he objected. Then he unleashed one of his signature phrases, "But what to them is an American dream, to us is an American nightmare." Malcolm counted himself as one of the rare black activists cognizant of the era of great change unfolding domestically and internationally. He interpreted this transformation as less dependent on white goodwill than black political strength. It is not a case of wanting integration or separation, Malcolm argued. It is a case of wanting freedom, justice, and equality. The goal of black freedom struggle, he contended, pivoted around the achievement of human dignity, regardless of method. He characterized the entire world as ablaze with revolutionary insurgencies that pitted the darker denizens against old and new Western empires. Living in an era where dark mankind wants freedom required black Americans to reimagine the terrain of struggle from narrowly domestic to expansively international. Quote, the same rebellion, the same impatience, the same anger that exists in the hearts of a dark people in Africa and Asia is existing in the hearts and minds of 20 million black people in this country, who remained under a political regime as oppressive as any in the world. And he's hitting on, if you were with us for The Divide by Jason Hickel, the 60s were a momentous time around the globe for what VJ writes as a red star over the third world, right? This awakening of decolonization movements and for liberation and freedom of these formerly colonized subjects around the world. And I think that like what he's getting at, and I've talked about this on previous episodes while we're talking about this book, I think that he wants a return, and he wants almost like a more expansive Black Wall Street. He wants, flourishing black cities that, have business and economies almost of their own, to be able to provide for their people. But at the same time, even under those cities, it would still require there to be, a business owner. A business owner that is the proprietor over a worker, right? Over someone who is not getting paid their full wage, right? So no matter what, we're that strategy just relies on recreating, right, that structured class society, right? But with, black Americans instead of white, or, without black people at the bottom of that white class hierarchy,
Yeah. And I think that this was just an important introduction to James Farmer, who, we studied, obviously MLK and Malcolm X. We did a brief,
we debated it.
No, they can't see that.
Okay, here we go.
Okay, yeah, because I was going to say it flagged it. Oh, but Ella Baker, we did a side thing on just to learn a little bit more about that. We did Bayard Rustin. Was it Rustin or Ruskin? Rustin.
I think it's Rustin.
Rustin.
T, yeah.
Now James Farmer is another player in the American civil, like one of the lesser known players in the American civil rights movement. So if you go forward, I actually have footage of this debate that he had with Malcolm X. And actually, it wasn't just with Malcolm X. It was with Malcolm X and with a representative of the SCLC, Martin Luther King's organization. So we'll watch a little bit of this. I think it's important for learning about James Farmer and the CORE organization.
Are we watching all 10 minutes of it?
We don't have to.
Okay.
First, Wyatt T. Walker, Chief of Staff of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference and Executive Assistant to the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. Alan Morrison, New York editor of Ebony magazine. Malcolm X, minister of Mosque Number 7 here in New York City, a leader in the Black Muslim organization. And James Farmer, National Director of CORE, the Congress of Racial Equality. Mr. Farmer, I think I would begin the program by putting the first question to you, referring back to this Ebony magazine story that quotes you as saying that Negroes are fed up. You say they are, quote, not afraid to go to jail now. They wear jail sentences as badges of honor, not even being afraid of being shot. These people aren't going to stop. And I wonder, Mr. Farmer, how you would conclude that. Aren't going to stop until what?
We aren't going to stop until a black skin is no longer considered a badge of deformity by the American people. We are not going to stop until the dogs stop biting little children in Alabama, until the rats in tenement slums in Harlem and 100 Harlems throughout the country stop biting our people. We are not going to stop until the bigots of the South and the North no longer challenge a man's right to live simply because he is asking for the rights which the Constitution says are his, as happened to NAACP Field Secretary Medgar Evers, who was shot and killed in Jackson, Mississippi. We are not going to stop, in a word, until we have the same rights that all Americans have.
Medgar Evers was the name of the political organizer I kept trying to remember that was shot in his own driveway. Well, he was, he was bringing in T-shirts, for like some rally or something, and they shot him in his driveway.
Okay, nice. Okay, well, I'm glad we could finally put a cap on that one.
Sorry, that's just...
No, I appreciate it.
We are not going to stop until we have jobs and are not walking the street unemployed in a proportion which is more than 2 times as great as among whites. We are not going to stop until we have the right to a house, a decent home, an apartment, any place we choose to live. We are not going to stop until we have the right to enter any place which serves the public all over the country. We are not going to stop, in a word, until America becomes America for all people.
What would your assumption be about the time when, as you say, America becomes America for all people?
Things are moving very rapidly now, and I think they're moving to a climax. This is a climactic stage of the struggle. And I would expect that within 2 or 3 years, the most brutal aspects of segregation in the South, that is formal segregation, will be eliminated. Segregation in businesses that serve the public. I would expect, however, that there will be exceptions, that in the hardcore states of the Deep South, such as Mississippi and Alabama, and the hardcore areas of the Upper and Middle South, it will take a few years longer for us to break down those barriers. I would expect that it will take several years longer in the North for us to wipe out the more subtle forms of discrimination in housing, in employment, in de facto school segregation, and of police brutality. I think, however, that within 5 or 10 years at the most, I'll be able to take a vacation and go fishing.
The next slide is another video of the same debate. This is kind of a good introduction to who James Farmer is from CORE. He kind of, got to lay out his kind of position here a little bit. The next video is way more centered on Malcolm. I'm pretty sure this guy talks for like almost his entire thing, and I don't want to take up too much time with this.
Okay. Do you want me to go on to the next one?
Next slide, and then play that. It's the same thing. It's the same conversation. Yep, it's the same conversation, just more of Malcolm's kind of time to talk. And I think that we should give that its due.
Notice, but as long as this mass element is led, and when I say led, I use led in quotes, actually contained by Uncle Tom Negro leaders who hold them back, who tell them turn the other cheek, and things like that, then the white power structure isn't worried at all. They're only worried when they know that the masses of black people are ready to explode, and in exploding it will destroy some of the furniture in their house, and then they react accordingly.
So this is Malcolm speaking directly to what I talked about earlier, where JFK played a lot of lip service to the civil rights movement, but you really had to force his hand to really engage any kind of like federal engagement with the civil rights issue, like when churches were about to get burned down and people murdered and more people being murdered during the freedom rides. Then he begrudgingly starts doing some things. Malcolm is calling them out directly for that. You know what I mean? Saying that like they only help when things are about to explode, and maybe that explosion will damage some of their furniture. I just love how he phrased that.
Ms. Morrison? Well, I believe that the dominant interests in our society, which are white, of course, are extremely worried that their system will be seriously damaged. It is disrupted now, and they want to halt the disruption, which is being caused by the rising wave of militancy among Negroes all over the country. President Kennedy, in commenting on the efforts and the methods being used by American Negroes to gain their ends and their goals, which simply stated are unrestricted access to citizenship rights, said that it is better to settle these matters in the courts than on the streets. But the Negro started out trying to settle his problems and to correct his disadvantages and destroy the basis for his struggle and eliminate the grievances, very serious grievances he had in the courts. Our NAACP was set up on the basis of legal struggle and legal tactics alone, and it had to revise its whole approach to the question.
And yet, Mr. Morrison, it seems to me that the president was saying that while he seeks to remove the struggle from the streets, that the courts have gone quite far, that the presidential office, the executive branch of our government, in the president's terms, has made certain steps, and he seems to be saying more now. He says, we face, therefore, a moral crisis as a country and a people. They cannot be met by repressive police action. It cannot be left to increase demonstrations in the streets. It cannot be quieted by token moves or talk. It is time to act in the Congress, in your state and local legislative body, and above all, in all of our daily lives, which is more than saying, let's send it back to the courts.
Why didn't he say this 3 years ago? Why didn't he say this when all of these sit-ins and freedom rides were very peacefully going on in the South and in other parts of the North? The man didn't say anything until he found out that black people in this country were ready to explode. And as soon as he saw that the explosion then was a threat to the white society, he came up with this mealy-mouthed speech, which is too late, and it's only a speech. We still don't see any actions that have stemmed from it. It's still only in the stage of words.
I think the speech is late, Minister Malcolm X, but not too late. No pronouncement that was that impressive and forthright from a president of the United States.
No one made a better pronouncement than Abraham Lincoln made 100 years ago, and that still hasn't been put into practice. It's still a pronouncement.
Sir, I applaud words for what words are worth, and those were good and beautiful words. Now we want to see the president follow up these words with deeds, because we will judge him in the next election. We will judge the entire administration, not by the beauty of the words which they uttered, nor the soundness of those words. We will judge them by what they do. Now, what can he do? He will propose legislation. This legislation must be forthright and powerful legislation, covering the whole gamut of discrimination against Negroes in housing, in employment, in schools, in public places. It must strike at the very root of segregation and prejudice. The president must do more than propose the legislation. He must get out and fight for it. He has a good chance of pushing it through now. I'd like to remind us that the president, in part, foreclosed the possibility of success of civil rights legislation by not fighting for a change in Senate Rule 22 at the beginning of this session of Congress. Now it'll be more difficult, but I think he can push it through. And I'd like to say that we are not going to sit by idly if we have to be spectators at the same old tragic comic opera of a filibuster in the Senate of the United States. We plan to have demonstrations.
This is Farmer from CORE and Malcolm, and they're kind of like, having this disagreement here on the presidential situation.
Yeah, it's interesting that he says, we'll see when he tries to seek re-election, and I hate to break it to you, buddy, that's not gonna happen. He's gonna wind up being a one-term kind of guy.
Most one-term president of all time.
Do you want me to keep going, or do you want to go to the next
slide?
slide?
No, go ahead. You can skip the. You can go to the next slide. No, go to the next slide.
Okay.
We got the gist of this situation.
The gist of it.
Notice, but as long as.
On April 27th, 1962, Los Angeles police fatally shot NOI member Ronald Stokes. Officers mistook him and a group of Muslims removing clothes from a car outside a Los Angeles mosque for criminals. The conflict quickly escalated to a police raid inside the mosque, leaving a total of 7 Muslims shot, 1 killed, and 1 paralyzed from a bullet wound to the back. This is the video that, I don't know if you were here at the beginning, we were playing Malcolm responding to reporters, about this story. Stokes' death compelled Malcolm to engage in new dimensions of the Black freedom struggle. He discovered a new center of political gravity by returning to the arena that had launched him, America's racially scarred criminal justice system. Decades before protests against mass incarceration galvanized the Black freedom struggle, Malcolm indicted the entire justice system as racist. His crusade against police brutality and violence against black folk in urban cities paralleled King's mobilization of Southern blacks in Montgomery and Albany. Malcolm transformed Stokes' death into a political indictment against American democracy, linking systemic police violence in Black Los Angeles to structural inequalities that he argued gripped every facet of American society. And he's not wrong.
Yeah. Like, this shows kind of like they're saying here is that we're focusing heavily, and all of the civil rights situation focuses heavily on these southern states. And this is just an example that these things are happening to a great and very cruel degree in urban places outside of the South, such as Los Angeles. So you can play this video. This is like the aftermath of the Nation of Islam members rioting after the death of Ronald Stokes. There's no like audio in this or whatever. It's just a short little kind of like it shows.
No, that's not what I wanted to do. That's the thing that they were talking about in like the first chapter.
Yeah, the two flags. Yeah.
Who the fuck is that guy?
I don't know. Might have been one of the cops or something. I don't know.
Well, I mean, like, Redmond Barry, LA has just like, what would you call it? Just a storied history of police violence that, like, nobody can really fault you for not knowing about this thing from, like, the 60s, considering that, like, the LAPD is, like, the world's, like, largest gang.
So on Friday, May 4th, 1 week after Stokes' death, Malcolm held court at the Statler Hilton Hotel. His press conference featured a poster-sized photo of Stokes, proof, Malcolm claimed, that Stokes had been viciously beaten in the head with a nightstick after he had been shot. The police went mad that night, he claimed. Anticipating a grand jury's ruling of justifiable homicide that would be released 11 days later, Malcolm prosecuted the Los Angeles Police Department and the entire criminal justice system to a wider black public, one that included civil rights activists, concerned citizens, the black working class, and elites. Malcolm responded to what he characterized as cold-blooded murder with action. He dove into the black freedom struggle with renewed conviction, forming an ad hoc coalition with civil rights groups. The Black United Front Malcolm often spoke of became a political reality through joint rallies with civil rights leaders, black nationalists, and local activists from everywhere from Boston to Oakland. At his most constructive, Malcolm brought together disparate strands of the black freedom movement, as he did at the Palm Gardens in New York shortly before Stokes' funeral, where he spoke alongside James Farmer, who we saw just a second ago in the video, and journalist William Worthy. Operating on little sleep, Malcolm blasted white liberals who accused him of being a reverse racist. If it's racism to know who my enemy is, if it's racism to know what I'm catching hell from white America, that it's condoned and sanctioned and backed and supported by a white government, if that's racism, well, I'll take racism above democracy and Americanism and any other kind of ism you can hand me, Malcolm thundered.
That's wild. I can't believe I've never heard that retort. Considering like the rise of the term of reverse racism in contemporary politics and popular culture.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because like
this is Malcolm talking at the funeral.
Fucking like, I had one of my sister's friends, because, like, I said something about, like, white people or something, I don't know,
Yeah.
and I'm like, you know, she's like, oh, wow, racist much? And I'm like, that's not how racism works. You can't be racist against the literally, like, you know, the benefactor of, you know, the racial caste system that we live within.
Mm-hmm.
In order for you and me to devise some kind of method or strategy to offset some of the events or a repetition of the events that have taken place here in Los Angeles recently, we have to go to the root. We have to go to the cause. Dealing with the condition itself is not enough. We have to get to the cause of it all, or the root of it all. And it is because of our effort toward getting straight to the root that people oftentimes think we're dealing in hate. But first, I would like to congratulate and give praise to the Negro, so-called Negro leaders and so-called Negro organizations. And excuse me if I say so-called, it's hard for me to just outright say Negro when I know what that word Negro really means. The person whom you have come to know as Ronald Stokes, we know him as Brother Ronald. One of the most religious persons who displayed the highest form of morals of any black person anywhere on this earth. And as one of the previous speakers pointed out who knew him, everyone who knew him had to give him credit for being a good man, a clean man, an intelligent man, and an innocent man when he was murdered. The Negro, so-called Negro organizations and leaders should be given great credit for their failure or refusal to let the white man divide them and use them one against the other during this crisis. As Reverend Wilfred Wilson pointed out, I think it was 8 years ago today that the Supreme Court handed down the desegregation decision. And despite the fact that 8 years have gone past, that decision hasn't been implemented yet. I don't have that much faith. I don't have that much confidence. I don't have that much patience. And I don't have that much ignorance to... If the Supreme Court, which is the highest law-making body in the country, can pass a decision that can't get even 8% compliance within 8 years because it's for black people, then my patience has run out. When black people who are being oppressed become impatient, they say that's emotional. Please. When black people who are being deprived of their citizenship, not only of their civil rights, but their human rights, become impatient, become fed up, don't want to wait any longer, then they say that's emotional. The Negro, so-called Negro leaders and organizations should be praised. They should be congratulated. They should be complimented. Because out of all of them combined, the white man has not yet found one who will play the role of Uncle Tom.
Why does this keep trying to recommend me fucking Jordan Peterson?
Well, that's a Majority Report video.
Oh, all right. Oh.
About.
In order.
All right. This is me, right?
I have no idea anymore.
Malcolm X's eulogy of Ronald Stokes doubled as an intellectual seminar in institutional racism in the justice system. He informed the 2,000 in attendance that despite religious, political, and ideological differences, they were being brutalized because we are black people in America. He decried the depiction of black anger against lynching, rape, and murder as violence, noting that the U.S. government doesn't call it violence when it lands troops in South Vietnam. Black communities were living in a police state, he argued, demonized by law enforcement, the press, and the public. He identified Ronald Stokes as a world citizen, a recognized part of the dark world fighting for humanity in the face of white supremacy. In searing language, Malcolm laid out the political vision he would now follow. The death of Ronald Stokes had pushed him to his breaking point with the Nation of Islam's policy of non-engagement in political activism and in his personal relationship with Elijah Muhammad. His departure from the group began in earnest as he eulogized Stokes in language more befitting a political leader than a Muslim minister. His words reverberated through the nation as well. In Chicago, Muhammad unveiled 2 manifestos detailing what the Muslims want and what the Muslims believe, that included eliminating police brutality and would provide inspiration for a new generation of black activists. So what we're seeing here is that, again, Malcolm is being pushed a little bit further and further, not maybe like outside of the Nation of Islam, but like above it. Like it kind of is like, you can't contain him the same way because he is continually, this began where he met with Fidel Castro, which Elijah Muhammad denounced because it's getting him involved in extracurricular activities outside of the Nation of Islam. So now with the murder of Ronald Stokes, you're seeing this become more and more of an issue where he's sounding more and more like a political rights activist than he does a Muslim, religious leader.
But like, that's the thing is like the only reason that people are attracted into the NOI is because of Malcolm's ability to, succinctly, define these things with a political, as well as like a philosophical or like, theocratic, root to it or bend to it. You know what I mean? You know what I mean, chat? No, you're good, bro. Don't worry about it.
Sorry, I just had a care package dropped off.
I saw.
All right.
So, King stepped up his criticism of the Kennedy administration's reticence on civil rights by publishing a combative essay, Fumbling on the New Frontier in the Nation, which served as a sequel to his piece a year earlier. The essay forcefully attacked President Kennedy for failing to live up to campaign promises to desegregate federal housing by executive order. It also displayed King's combative side, one that supporters and critics tended to ignore. Malcolm X's criticism of King often failed to acknowledge his militant role within the mainstream civil rights movement. While Roy Wilkins and the NAACP proceeded cautiously in acknowledging disappointment with the slow pace of the Kennedy White House, King expressed his dissatisfaction in bold strokes, chiding the president for engaging in, quote, cautious and defensive struggle for civil rights against an unyielding adversary. On this point, the white supremacy and institutional racism formed unapologetic obstacles to racial progress. Malcolm X undoubtedly agreed. He and King parted ways on solutions, with the Southern preacher maintaining an obstinate hope that creative policies, legislative breakthroughs, and legal precedents, combined with spiritual and social transformation, would change hearts and minds while healing deep-seated racial wounds. Kennedy's reluctance to sign the House executive order especially irked King. He argued that the Kennedy administration's symbolic gesture of Negro cabinet appointees accomplished only the quote, limited goal of token integration rather than the sweeping changes required to crush racial discrimination once and for all. Maybe theological. Fidel.
Yeah, so what we have here now is, if you remember earlier, in the beginning of these slides, King wrote a speech called Equality Now, the President Has the Power. This is a sequel to that, which is called Fumbling on the New Frontier. And if you know, JFK had a program called the New Frontier Program, where he made all these kinds of statements about programs that he was going to be doing. So this is pretty much a diss track right at JFK, saying fumbling on the new frontier, You talked all this game about what you were going to do. You're not doing it. You're just doing token integration. You're not helping us where we really need to. You said you would be here. We got you elected, and you just talked a bunch of shit, and you're not following through on it. So now we can see King is becoming more and more disillusioned with the political game that he's been trying to play here with the JFK administration.
Even your children ain't gonna grow old. Sorry, it just made me. You know what I was getting at, right?
Yeah, Tupac.
Yeah. Fucking.
Okay.
Do you want me to read this?
No, I got it.
You sure?
It is really hot anyway. King found time in the midst of fundraising for the SCLC to meet in New York with Ahmed Ben Bella. Do you know this person?
I have no fucking idea.
Okay.
Oh,
okay,
God
so
damn it. I'm sorry.
With Ahmed Ben Bella, the dashing premier of the new Algerian Republic, which came into being after a bloody guerrilla war against the French. King met with Ben Bella at the Barclay Hotel in New York, a summit that echoed aspects of Malcolm X's meeting with Fidel Castro, but with a twist. Whereas Castro and Malcolm implicitly recognized violence as a tactic for building a new society, King and Ben Bella found common ground in the effectiveness of nonviolence in the U.S. struggle. Over the course of nearly 2 hours, King found Ben Bella to be unusually well informed about the civil rights struggles taking place in the States, from the Montgomery bus boycott to the sit-in movement. The significance of our conversation was Ben Bella's complete familiarity with the progression of events in the Negro struggle for full citizenship, King wrote. Afterward, in an essay published in the New York Amsterdam News, King described battles against colonialism in Algeria and for black citizenship in America as part of a common struggle that reflected the global dimensions of the civil rights movement. Ben Bella's assertion that America would lose its moral and political voice in world affairs if it failed to end Jim Crow resonated deeply with King and in the black press, which reported of the meeting as a major political breakthrough on matters of racial justice. King told reporters that during their conversation, Ben Bella regretted the necessity of violence in forging Algeria's own revolution. The meeting deepened King's appreciation of the impact that unfolding African revolutionaries might have domestically. So this is actually kind of parallel with what Malcolm X was experiencing with people in Sudan and in Saudi Arabia and Egypt that were saying they were calling out the unjust racial system in the United States as well. So like this kind of is King having his own situation where he's like being surprised at how well African nations know of the civil rights issues in the United States. Now, Ahmed Ben Bella, Algerian revolutionary socialist, and then the first prime minister of independent Algeria. We're towards the end of our slides here, but I have a couple videos here. One about the Algerian Revolution, because I feel like to understand like why this is so significant and so interesting and actually very radical of King, we could watch that, and then then we're gonna like be about done. So are you cool with that?
Oh yeah, no, and we can deep dive his Wikipedia after the video if we're out after that.
Yeah, I read it over.
Yeah, no, I'm while you were reading, I was looking at his Wikipedia. I was like, this dude's fucking cool as fuck.
We'll watch the video because this video is wild. It's a little, I think it's like 16 minutes, but it's a really good video because I had very little understanding of what had gone down in Algeria, and I think it's cool to like learn this, and it kind of gives another layer into Martin Luther King, because we talked about him meeting with Kwame Nkrumah, meeting with Nehru, and now he is here meeting with an actual like socialist revolutionary soldier from the guerrilla war in Algeria as well. Is this 16 minutes? I was right there.
Yeah, it's 16 minutes, so.
In ideology, today we are going to be discussing the Algerian War for Independence. The War for Independence in Algeria, which lasted between 1954 and 1962, goes by many names, but for our purposes here, it seems most fitting to call it by its Algerian name, the War of 1 November. This refers to the date 1954 when Algerian freedom fighters began their attacks on government buildings. However, it must be noted that as in many colonial contexts, oppressive, indiscriminate violence by the colonizer as well as informal resistance existed from the onset of imperial activity dating all the way back to the 19th century French invasion. Algerian independence also not only exemplifies the post-World War II reality of post-colonialism, but it challenges notions of binary paradigms. While there was indeed a colonizer, France, and a colonized population, Algerians, both these quote-unquote sides, were far from monoliths. Algeria existed as a crossroads of trade, migration, and settlement between Africa, Europe, and Western Asia, and both flourished under and endured numerous changes in ruling peoples for millennia before French annexation. This created centuries-old layered diversity as various groups mingled, exchanged, fought, conquered, and governed, resulting in a complex web of ethnic, political, and ideological groups. As for the French side, their century of colonial rule also included a number of other Europeans living in Algeria. Further, as most people, even with limited knowledge of history, are aware, World War II was quite hard on France. Much rebuilding, both material and ideal, was required after the war. Many French thought that these domestic issues should take precedent over maintaining faraway colonies. Others also saw in the world wars the consequences of the continued practice of European discourses.
Did they bring
in
up
other
the
words,
Battle
some
for
finally
Algiers
learned their
movie yet,
lesson.
or is
Nationalism.
Sam just predicting the future?
What?
Did they already bring up the Battle for Algiers movie yet, or is Sam just predicting the future?
I think Sam's just predicting the future.
Sam, they bring up. I never heard of it before, but Sam, they talk about that movie in this little essay.
Imperialism, colonialism, and the competition between powers led to their and others' near wholesale destruction twice. These lessons mixed with weariness of heavy-handed governance to create a growing anti-colonial sentiment within France itself. In fact, historians consider the Algerian War for Independence the breaking point for France's Fourth Republic, eventually to be replaced by the Fifth. French invasion of Algeria began with the Battle of Algiers in 1830. They invaded under the auspices of righting perceived wrongs done to them in Mediterranean trade by North African sultanates, such as taxing, tributes, and piracy. Hundreds of thousands of Europeans flooded the region in the following decades. These immigrants were called the Pieds Noirs. The influx of Europeans was abetted by intense violence. As many as 825,000 Algerians were killed by 1875. Some scholars, and even whole nations like the Republic of Turkey, argue this constitutes an attempted genocide. Resistance by the Algerian population remained constant. Heroes such as Lala Fatma and Soumer and Abd al-Qadir represented the...
This is like relatively recent, too. This is post-Civil War that almost a million Algerians... 1875, it said.
I missed that part, but holy shit. Yeah, no, that is like extremely recent.
Can you go back? Maybe I misheard it while I was eating. Because you're obviously, but go back just like 10 seconds. It said like 1875. I guess maybe that's the entire colonial endeavor, maybe.
1830.
But keep going, watch.
Wait, hang on.
French invasion of Algeria began with the Battle of Algiers in 1830. They invaded under the auspices of righting perceived wrongs done to them in Mediterranean trade by North African sultanates, such as taxing, tributes, and piracy. Hundreds of thousands of Europeans flooded the region in the following decades. These immigrants were called the Pieds Noirs. The influx of Europeans was abetted by intense violence. As many as 825,000 Algerians were killed by 1875. Some scholars, and even whole nations like the Republic of Turkey, argue this constitutes an attempted genocide. Resistance by the Algerian population remained constant. Heroes such as Lala Fatma and Soumer and Abd al-Qadir represented the independent Algerian spirit. They became hallowed names during the 20th century independence movement in question and remain highly revered to this day. The period known as the pacification of Algeria lasted until 1905. The French committed countless atrocities against the Algerians, including targeting civilians during military campaigns. In the words of Colonel Lafrancois de Montenac in his Letters from a Soldier in Paris in 1885, he says, quote, "In my opinion, everybody who does not accept our conditions must be eliminated. All of them must be taken, pillaged, with no distinction as to age or sex. Grass
so this
should
is
no longer
1905.
grow where the French army has passed." End quote.
Thank you for
the
the
French
follow-up,
also
Sympathized
forced
Sword.
mass deportations and dispossession. In the words of General de Roqueville, "We cannot civilize them. We must send them far away, like wild animals who keep away from the vicinity of inhabited places. They must recede to the desert as we progress with our settlements. They must stay forever in the sands of the Sahara." End quote. The French tortured Algerians. Again, Montenac asserts, "A severed head produces a terror stronger than the death of 50 people. I've understood this for a long time, and I assure you that none makes it out of my claws that has not undergone the delicate operation." End quote.
What the fuck?
French colonists also engaged in sexual predation. Montenac admits, quote, "The Algerian women we capture, some we keep as hostages, and the rest are auctioned to the troops like animals. In the operations we have carried out during the last 4 months, I have witnessed scenes that would melt the hardest heart, if one let oneself be moved. I witnessed it all with a frightening indifference. Women and children caught on thick bush wood, which they had to cross as they surrendered to us. We kill, we slaughter.
Yo, fuck the French. Just straight up, fuck the French.
They're like the worst.
Like,
and like
literally the worst.
Don't get brought up enough. Like, 'cause, and as we're gonna get brought up again, this is at the same time that all the shit's going on in Vietnam. Also, if you know all the fucked up shit that they're doing in Vietnam,
I'm assuming
and
it's
also,
like the same
I'm pretty
shit.
sure they have several other African colonies at this point, like in Senegal and shit like that.
Right.
So
Dreaming
yeah,
of the terror-stricken and the dying
dicks.
blends with the sounds of the beasts.
If you're learning guitar late in life, there's one distinction that will determine if you're going to succeed or fail.
I can just give you my login for
I
YouTube.
know.
These all too brief quotes illuminate the disgusting nature of French occupation in Algeria. For more, check out Ayarua's Reading Notes on French Colonial Massacres in Algeria. To be clear, nearly 1/3 of the Algerian population lost their lives under the first century of colonization. Colonialism didn't cease during or after the back-to-back world wars. In fact, European nations forced their colonial subjects to fight for them. Over 200,000 Algerians fought in each of the wars, and yet their bravery was rarely rewarded. Aside from extremely poor treatment while serving, they were welcomed back home to even more oppressive post-war lives. Much like in other colonized nations, Algerians were not only exasperated by French subjugation, but had fully realized the hypocrisy of Western colonial projects. How could people who had been rationalizing their occupations across the world as quote-unquote civilizing missions call themselves civilized and denigrate local cultures, beliefs, and practices when they nearly destroyed themselves and much of the globe, not once, but twice? On February 10th, 1943, future elected President Farhat Abbas published the Manifesto of the Algerian People, which called for Algerian autonomy. French officials, including the famed Charles de Gaulle, rejected it. By 1945, protests became more prominent and some turned to riots. In the cities and regions around Sétif and Guelma, French police fired on protesters. Algerians responded by attacking French settlers in the hinterlands. The French then massacred over 30,000 Muslims in the region. Important but graphic footage can be found on YouTube from the Algerian Press Service. Scholars point to a couple of massacres in Sétif and Guelma as possible matches that eventually ignited newfound resistance, culminating in the formal beginning of the War for Independence.
Also, if I'm not mistaken, that is this is the shit that Marie Le Pen's like father or grandfather was going to Algiers to do.
And this is what Fanon was, sitting alongside of as well during his time as a psychologist in Algeria. Correct?
I believe so. Yeah.
It was Algeria, right? If I'm not mistaken, I believe.
Yeah. No, he's from Martinique, but he spent his time in Algeria.
Yeah. Yep. He was a member of the
European empires used the word civilized the way U.S. term uses. Oh yeah, no, look. It's the same shit as it was 100 years ago, 200 years ago, 300 years ago, with just different words, and they dress it up a little bit better, and they have better propaganda. That's it.
Well, and if you remember that in last week when we watched the young Stokely Carmichael fielding questions from some liberal reporter, in his parting words, he says, what would you tell the white man or something like that? And he says, I would tell the white man that you're the savage, that you're the one that needs civilization. You know what I mean? And this is the fucking prime fucking example of that type of statement. Because what we're looking at right now, this picture is not far off from when Stokely said those words.
Look at how the U.S., right, or the average person in the U.S. looks at any other nation. Look at how, any person in the U.S. looks at how any other country that, economically, not even, moves it out of the way, right, but presents, an economic threat, right? The average person thinks that, the Russian government does things the same way the U.S. government does. The Chinese government does the same thing that the U.S. government does, right? And they want to do the same things that we did, right? Because what other way is there?
Right.
9 years of instability, French political repression, Algerian underrepresentation, and violence resulted in the formation of the National Liberation Front in 1954. And on November 1st, they launched the Algerian War for Independence. Emboldened by the French defeat at Dien Bien Phu in Vietnam, the FLN called for a sovereign Algerian state. French troops countered. The famous film Battle of Algiers recreates the next 3 years of the war through a dramatization that better illuminates political, social, and militant components than we can here. It's wildly celebrated for its immersive qualities. It's described by Canopy as a work that vividly recreates a key year in the tumultuous Algerian struggle for independence, from the occupying French in the 1950s. As violence escalates on both sides, children shoot soldiers in point-blank range, women plant bombs in cafes, and French soldiers resort to torture to break the will of the insurgents. Shot on the streets of Algiers in documentary style, the film is a case study in modern warfare, with its terrorist attacks and the brutal techniques used to combat them. The Battle for Algiers period gave way to the counterinsurgency period in Algeria, which remains among the most researched cases among politicos, military thinkers, neocolonialists, and most importantly, human rights advocates to this day. Needless to say, all of these researchers approach the situation using a different lens, seeking different lessons. What followed were a handful of key lowlights from the period of the war. The FLN orchestrated a general strike in the country's capital, which was wildly effective. They hit the colonizers in the wallet, so to speak, a tactic that remains underutilized in more recent movements. Additionally, they were able to bomb strategic targets, as well as hone their guerrilla fighting tactics in and around the city. These tactics have been used with great success in countless liberation movements around the world through this day. In fact, the famed Cuban revolutionary hero Che Guevara wrote the how-to guide, Guerrilla Warfare, using lessons he not only learned himself, but from other examples he studied, to include Algeria, which he eventually visited in 1964.
Thinking about going solar, but not sure.
I know. I know.
In response to these tactics, the French fell back on the tried and true colonial tactic of divide and rule, by either inflaming existing racial, ethnic, or religious difference, or by offering financial or political incentives for Algerians to turn against their fellow nationals. They created the Special Administration Section, or the SAS, in 1955. A large portion of the fighting against the FLN made use of Harkis, irregular Algerian troops under French command. Aside from the more traditional recruitment tactics, the SAS also targeted and threatened FLN family members to get freedom fighters to turn. This was a key element in the growing use of psychological warfare in the conflict, and it became a key point of research for outside observing military, often so they could make use of this tactic in their own occupations. French Foreign Legion leaders also helped to manufacture their own clandestine counter-guerrilla forces, sometimes using turned FLN members, to terrorize the populace through bombings that would then be blamed on the FLN or its affiliates. These are often called false flag operations. In response to the FLN's gains, the French started to lean more heavily on technological advantages. Their counterinsurgency tactics featured the use of helicopters for the first time to attack ground forces by laying down indiscriminate fire from above. Further, they also bombed militant and non-militant targets with napalm. Other observing invasive imperial powers would take these ethically questionable tactics to other parts of the globe, most blatantly the United States in its war in Vietnam and surrounding nation-states. The French military forcefully also moved over 2 million Algerians into concentration camps, much like the British were doing in Kenya around the same time. Check out our in-depth series on this topic and some of our videos on the Mau Mau Rebellion. Concentration and forced labor usually took place in more rural zones in the hopes that remote...
What was that?
Oh, I said... And also in Malaysia. Remember when I brought up that Malaysia...
Yes.
Malayan emergency? They called it the emergency, where they displaced like 1.5 million Malaysian people into concentration camps. They did it in Kenya. They did it in Algeria. I'm pretty sure they also did it in the Philippines. And like, this is all like, 20th century shit. And it's like, when people make those like extremely ludicrous comparisons of like, look how the Western, we've never been, as nearly as repressive as those dang Reds, over there. It's like,
what the hell are you talking about?
Who even knows what happened in what?
Like, where is this? Where is the Soviet Union doing this?
Exactly. Well, not only that, people don't even know about this. You have no idea what happened in Algeria. You have no idea what happened in Malaysia. You have no idea what happened in the Philippines. Like, it is so far out of your like political understanding of the world, of the history of the world. And, there's several like things that are highlighted, distorted, contorted to fit narratives. And these are just brushed into the dustbin of history for no one to ever know about.
Reverend Barry, look, most people probably don't even understand anything about Afghanistan prior to 2001. I'm going to let you know right now that the average American, maybe knows, some fucked up, and by fucked up, I mean, incorrect ideas about it because of Call of Duty or something, right? But the average, person has no fucking idea about, Afghan history and, the 70s, 60s, 50s, 40s, 30s, you know, you go back to like the early part of like the 19th century, let alone before that. I'm going to tell you right now, the average U.S. citizen doesn't know anything, right? The same thing could be said about Iraq, that like, you know, they might know like, you know, some pop culture shit, you know, from like the 80s and Operation Desert Storm and stuff like that. They might know, you know, some shit like, you know, especially after, you know, what is it? What do we call it? Operation like Iraqi Freedom or something stupid and goofy like that. But, you know, anything further back than the 80s, maybe the 70s, right? No. I'm gonna make like a strong assumption that like the average American knows nothing about Iraqi history, and they know nothing about like its political history. We only know what they tell us at best, and that's because we live in an invented reality. Our consent is manufactured for, you know, a world that cannot be, that cannot exist with the history that we are taught.
All right, let's keep on with the video here because I'm actually
Villages
enjoying
could no
this quite a
longer
bit.
serve as FLN suppliers or places to hide. Finally, it must be noted that the French made heavy and explicit use of torture to gather information, turn FLN fighters, and terrorize civilians. Even mass rape became a tactic to subdue the Algerian fighting spirit. Current President of France, Emmanuel Macron, has recently admitted to some of these atrocities. Sources ranging from France 24 to TRT World to Telesur offer proof of the atrocities and Macron's admissions. Between the loss in Vietnam, Algerian resistance, as well as internal opposition in France, all amid attempting to rebuild after World War II, the French government began to crack. In the words of Britannica, the long and brutal struggle in Algeria gravely affected the political life of the Fourth Republic and ended by destroying it. A vocal minority in France openly favored a negotiated settlement, though no political leader dared take so unpopular a position. Right-wing activists, outraged at what they saw as the spread of defeatism, turned to conspiracy. Both in Paris and in Algiers, extremist groups began to plot the replacement of the Fourth Republic by a tougher regime, headed by army officers or perhaps by General de Gaulle. These plans had not yet matured when a cabinet crisis in April and May of 1958 gave the conspirators a chance to strike. On May 13th, when a new cabinet was scheduled to present its program to the National Assembly, activist groups in Algiers went to the streets in an effort to influence Parliament's vote. By nightfall, they were in control of the city and set up an emergency government with local army support. De Gaulle, on May 15th, announced that he was prepared to take power if called to do so by his fellow citizens. 2 weeks of negotiations followed, interspersed with threats of violent action by the Algerian rebels. Most of the Fourth Republic's political leaders reluctantly concluded that de Gaulle's return was the only alternative to an army coup that might lead to civil war. So on June 1st, the National Assembly voted de Gaulle full powers for 6 months, thus putting de facto an end to the Fourth Republic in France. The collapse of the Fourth Republic reveals something often overlooked in successful post-colonial movements: the fact that the freedom fighters have keen insight into global contexts and currents, as well as political situations back in the colonizing nation-state. For example, the FLN resistance only really ramped up after the French were defeated in one of their other colonial regions, South Indochina. They also saw that other French protectorates in North Africa, like Morocco and Tunisia, were gifted more autonomy before Algeria. They also were aware of the growing exhaustion back in France of dealing with colonial uprisings when many thought working on quote-unquote French issues inside France should take precedent. Wars of attrition make use of international and domestic pressures and are absolutely crucial to eventually winning independence. Doubling down on this notion, the Vietnamese, who inspired Algerians, would in return take inspiration from Algerians when they successfully defeated the United States just over a decade later by, again, a war of attrition. France desperately wanted this war to be considered internal and absolve itself of all international scrutiny, but the FLN, of course, sought the opposite. They first appealed to the relatively newly formed United Nations, creating solidarity with a number of new post-colonial member nations. An Algerian delegation even attended the Non-Alignment Conference in Bandung, Indonesia in 1955. They also reached out to the Soviet bloc for monetary and military support. They knew this might pressure France's NATO allies to use their influence on French policy. Under the quote-unquote Red Scare ethos at the time, the US and UK might rather see an independent Algeria side with the West peacefully, rather than feel like they have no other alternative than to turn to the Soviets for anti-imperial help, like so many other newly forming nation-states. The FLN also received support from China and were able to use the communist rivalry between the People's Republic and the Soviet Union to secure even more aid from each. Despite this aid, the FLN was technically losing the war militarily, at least in terms of casualties, but they were winning the PR campaign.
This is why it's so important to have like a multipolar like world. You know what I mean? Like that, like, Algeria has this kind of like option as like an emerging independent state to like not have to rely on IMF loans or the World Bank or the United States aid or something like that, that there is like robust alternatives for them to not be just like completely crushed under, just getting like this nominal independence and then getting like all of that independence essentially neutered by having to deal with the IMF.
For me, it just kind of makes me a little bit more upset that like the Sino-Soviet split happened at all, because imagine what like a unified front between the two could have looked like, and like how much more support, not just Algiers, but like various other nations, during that anti-colonial movement could have had. Seb's Dev says people also underestimate how much help the USSR was giving all around the world while still building and developing itself. Correct. True.
Recovering from the World War.
Right, but I think that honestly the Soviet Union should have gone the route of China, and that's a whole conversation for another day.
Pain and the war of attrition as French stomachs became weaker and weaker with each passing day. By 1959, France, through its brutal methodology, still controlled almost all of Algeria, but with little fanfare back home and with little evidence that the FLN would give up. The key was that the FLN's international recognition led to heavy press coverage, to include in France itself. More and more French political representatives of the people turned against the war for myriad reasons, to include conscription, recent losses in Indochina, financial costs, a new internationalist ethic, and humanitarianism. Protests broke out in France itself, led by students and unions, and a string of left-leaning politicians in high governmental posts who formed parties or organizations to politically challenge the colonial position from Paris. The new Fifth Republic under de Gaulle felt compelled to seek a new position on Algeria. Some extremist French militants in Algeria responded by starting an insurrection of their own against the Fifth Republic in Algiers, but what became known as the Week of Barricades was short-lived. French counterinsurgency measures continued for the next year, however, and also included targeting remaining French colonists as well. By the end of 1960, a clear majority of French people had turned against the war. Initially, under-the-table peace negotiation between the de Gaulle government and the FLN slowly became more public. The nail in the coffin for remaining colonial thinkers and actors was a failed coup against de Gaulle in 1961. Official peace talks started at Evian-les-Bains, France, in May of 1961. Unfortunately, while politicians mired themselves in bureaucracy, violence remained a daily reality in Algeria. Colonials, feeling abandoned by their government, took their aggression out on Algerians, and the FLN responded in kind. The secret army organization, known as the OAS, a group of French colonists operating solely on their own, started targeting French politicians as well as Algerians. As peace drew near in 1962, these right-wing extremists launched a number of violent terrorist attacks, hoping to goad the FLN into responding and perhaps turn the public relations lens back in their favor. The FLN remained disciplined, and the OAS was met with little fanfare in France at this point. Apparently thinking there was nothing to lose, the OAS went on to stage attacks against French soldiers as well. Irrationally and unethically privileged does not begin to describe what essentially became a series of violent tantrums against both the colonized and their own government by these French conservative actors, whose opposition to progress was solely the product of myopic selfishness. Despite OAS violence, in February of 1962 an agreement had been reached. Votes in April and July revealed an overwhelming majority in both France and Algeria supported independence. It must be noted that this led to a refugee crisis in France, as hundreds of thousands of Pieds Noirs and Harkis fled across the Mediterranean with their tails between their legs. Revolutionary soldier and populist Ahmed Ben Bella used his notoriety to consolidate support to help lead a newly free country as prime minister, and on July 5th of 1962, Algeria gained its independence.
So we went through that long journey to get to Ben Bella. Ben Bella is the one who. All right, can you just? We don't have to watch this whole one, but this is just crazy. Can you just play this real quick? So, in addition to all of that, in 1961, it's DraftKings.
Just hang on a second. No, that's not it. Fucking.
So, pause it real quick. A lot of this colonial violence in like 1961 is happening in the colonies generally, for like the colonial powers that are holding on to these colonies and repressing like decolonial struggles within the colony. Correct?
Mm-hmm.
Just let this play for like a minute. You can unmute.
I thought this was an ad.
No.
All of a sudden, the riot police started shooting. I can still see it now. The men in front of us being shot down.
I described the methods used to kill them, strangulation mainly. They were knocked unconscious and thrown into the river.
Maurice Papon knew very well the mindset of the police on that day. For these crimes to be committed, the only thing he had to do was let it happen.
Hello and welcome to France in Focus. I'm Haxie Myers-Belkin. We're at Saint-Michel in central Paris, just a stone's throw from the Notre Dame Cathedral. It's an iconic spot, but it's also here that 6 decades ago, some 200 Algerians were murdered by French police. At the height of the Algerian War of Independence, thousands of people, many of them Algerians living on the outskirts of Paris, descended on the capital to demand an end to French
It's like 11 minutes long. We don't have to watch the whole thing. But I just wanted to like include this because it's like while all this is going on in Paris, in like, you know, probably one of the beacons of like Western liberal civilization, there is Algerians being massacred by the hundreds within feet of Notre Dame. In 1961.
That is incredible.
And Comrade Pesci, if you, thanks for covering the good shit. If that is referring to us and what we're covering here, thank you for appreciating the good shit because we love talking about it.
Sorry, I'm trying to fix this because it keeps, I think because the slides I'm accessing through like, you know, my personal Gmail account, like it keeps logging me into my personal YouTube account.
Sorry. Look at this one though. Read this.
Oh my god. Is that it? Is that the last slide?
No.
What am I reading?
Go forward. You didn't go to the next slide.
Oh, all right. This one?
Yeah. Chat, read it up. Read. It's all right. Read the title of this video. At least we can have a little bit of solace in knowing.
MS crowd carrying bro Ben. God.
No. I'm just saying the title of it.
Oh. Ben Bella nationalizing French land. What? I guess there's no audio.
No. Did you see the signs though? Viva la socialism.
This is probably going to get taken down when I upload it to YouTube.
Why?
It says license this film in the description.
Oh, I don't care.
Yeah.
All right, go ahead. And then we can see that he who nationalized that land and fought as a socialist soldier in the revolution, in the guerrilla war, there he is, shaking hands. He looks extremely happy, shaking hands with Martin Luther King. So you can just add him to the list of Jawaharlal Nehru and Kwame Nkrumah, who, you know, socialists who King was happy to meet with and used as inspiration for the civil rights movement in the United States.
So Nehru, Nkrumah, this guy. I feel like there's one other one that we're missing.
Maybe one day we'll discover that. There's still two more. There's still chapters here where two of them are called the Radical King and the Revolutionary King. So we still have a lot more King content to go off of. Is this one you or me?
I'll read it. King toured Alabama in December as part of the same voter registration drive that had taken him to parts of the South earlier in the year. Fred Shuttlesworth.
King got that Boosie fade.
Fred Shuttlesworth, the leader of Birmingham's local movement, and an SCLC member, enjoyed a good relationship with King and invited the group to participate in citywide demonstrations to end racial segregation in the Magic City. In Alabama, King had found a state under siege from racial terror and a black community unapologetically organizing for freedom. when terrorists bombed a black church that housed meetings of Shuttleworth, Alabama's Christian Movement for Human Rights, a name taken for the state, banned the NAACP. King telegrammed President Kennedy railing against the racist Gestapo methods, using the same language that Malcolm X had deployed describing the Stokes killing. Hang on one second. Both Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. recognized how deeply institutionalized racism threatened the hopes, dreams, and lives of blacks living in America. They each brilliantly diagnosed flaws within American democracy, yet they embraced different strategies for black liberation at this point, with King maintaining faith in legal and political solutions to combat racial injustice, and Malcolm relying on the growing strength, political sophistication, and worldliness of the black community as the true measure of power. In 1963, historic events in Birmingham would inspire each to recognize the value of the other's political personality, racial justice strategy, and commitment to black freedom.
So this, wait. Don't touch that yet. Don't touch that yet. So this last paragraph here sets us up for the coming chapter, which is Birmingham radicals. So this is bringing up, obviously it's very famous that Martin Luther King was arrested and jailed in Birmingham, and he writes the letters from Birmingham jail. So that's coming. It's a very significant part in Martin Luther King's life and the civil rights movement. So this last paragraph kind of brings us there from the freedom rides. But I added one more slide here, and CORE is a civil rights organization that has a lot of significance, but it's not covered enough. And I thought that maybe if I added a song, that maybe would help us remember CORE and who they were. So, Johnny, if you could just cue the next slide, please. I hope everybody has their audio on. So, a little song coming at you.
This better be good.
We were found in Chicago. Among our founding members were Farmer and Rustin and Hauser and Homer. White kids and black kids, they call us CORE. Ain't nobody messing with my rights. Rights. Ain't nobody pressing on my rights. Rights. All we do is challenge all these laws. All these nice people, man, they want these rights. They want them. Through the Congress of Racial Equality, my students, all these written like a D-Day. It's grind day. 42 in the 50s. I've been straight up for 9 years. I need some freedom. I'm saying screw segregation. I might get arrested, might free jail for that campaign. Freedom summer. Huh? Discrimination. Girl, you know the core name. You know farmer. You know the same. Nuclear policy is from 1960, man. In the summer of 64, man, we went from peaceful action to violence. 3 of us in Mississippi, the KK did not approve. 3 of us ended up dead, RIP. Voting rights and equality is what we all need. Just remember. Ain't nobody messing with my rights. Rights. Ain't nobody protecting all my rights. Rights. All we do is challenge all these laws. All these people, they want these rights. They want them a lot.
I'm getting my gun and I'm gonna shoot myself.
Dude, out of all things, how is it cool? Oh, dude.
Whoa. All right, sorry, I'm not trying to get...
I think that had to be for like a school project or something like that. Because like, out of all the civil rights things, what like could be like more obscure than CORE? Like, I barely know about CORE, and I read books about this movement. But I was looking for a little video on CORE to break it down, kind of like we did with SNCC. And I came across this, and I couldn't omit it. It had to be included.
No. that video shouldn't exist. All right?
But it
As somebody
does.
that uploads things to YouTube, you can take them down. There's no reason that had to be up there for the last 8 years.
Has it been up for 8 years?
It's been up for 8 years. So, all right. Do you think that like that's like the end of like this specific episode? I'm not saying we have to leave right now. I'm gonna stop recording. That way, like there's no issue when I start playing music. That like I have to edit that out or fucking like remove it from YouTube or anything like that.
Yeah, I think that that was certainly the end of any kind of reputable or dignified episode that we were having.
So-
That stopped it dead in its tracks. There's nothing after that.
So for those watching us on YouTube, it's been fun. It's been real. See you soon. Remember, we stream live Fridays, Sundays, and Wednesdays, 6 p.m. EST.